Wait, aren't we also supposed to show up on the screen? Well, good evening, everyone. There we go. Here we've queued up. Nice to see everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Laura conveniently didn't give me a gavel tonight, so I'll just ceremoniously say the word gavel. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukeeoregon.gov. You can locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you don't have an agenda, please, if you haven't reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. I'd like to move to our first order of business, our native lands acknowledgement. We have our slide. Look at this. Progress sometimes is one step at a time. The city of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and our gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. We don't have any minutes to consider this evening, so we can move on to informational items. Are there any informational items from staff? Thanks for helping out with some housekeeping. Welcome.
Yeah. The only thing, I guess, do you want to talk a little bit about the Planning Commission?
Sure.
And yeah, you want to go for that?
That sounds great.
Okay.
I think for fellow members of the Planning Commission, we just completed interviews. We had 11 applicants, interviewed 7, and finalized on 3 who I think are moving through the appointment process for Mayor Beatty and the rest of City Council. I think it's our expectation we'll have folks appointed by our next meeting, March 11th. And then we'll kind of have a full planning commission yet again. I believe Commissioner Fuenmayor, that means this might be your last evening with us. Really appreciate your service. And if you have anything you want to share, feel free. We actually have 2 of our new or would-be new planning commissioners here in person with us tonight, sitting in the audience, just getting up to speed, knowing that the transportation system plan is a long-term project that they'll be involved in. So Ryan and Nick, thanks for joining us in person. Really appreciate that. Commissioner Graytrick, I believe, is also sick, so we'll probably just catch up on video, and Commissioner Pinnock might also be under the weather as well. But nice to kind of have everyone here, and that's, I guess, kind of my piece. I don't know if I missed anything that you want to fill in.
No, I think you did a good job.
Great.
Yep.
Well, then we can move on to audience.
The only thing I didn't know if Commissioner Fuenmayor wanted to say anything.
Yeah.
I do. I want to say thank you to the city personnel who have been really, really helpful throughout all the process from the very beginning of studying it to organizing every single meeting and presenting all the wonderful reports and everything that you guys do, the work that you do behind the curtains that we just get to see a little piece of that. I'm really thankful for all that and for the opportunity to serve the community that I live and work and I love. And to the fellow commissioners that I appreciate your understanding, your listening, patience, and allowing me to be part of the commission for a little bit. Actually made it to a full year, I think. So it went pretty fast, but yes, a full year pretty much in the commission. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you again, Ernestina, for your service. Really appreciate it. And look forward to, as you kind of said last time, knowing you'll probably stay involved in a variety of other different things and that you're not going anywhere. So whether it's on a different committee or on our children's soccer fields. Look forward to seeing you there. We can move on to audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. Does any audience member in the room or online wish to comment on an item not on the agenda? If you're participating online, you can use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, or you can dial *9 to indicate you wish to make a comment.
Anybody online?
We have one person online, but no hands raised.
Okay, great. Well, our first and only agenda item is the work session on the city's transportation system plan. This is an update of the transportation system plan with a focus on existing conditions, needs and gaps, multimodal classifications. Our planning manager will present some information for discussion. So we can open up our work session and go from there.
All right, great. Thanks so much. I am going to hand most of the presentation over to Matt Hugart, who's our consultant with Kittleson, who's been with us since the beginning of the project. Ryan's been doing a heavy lift on the classifications that we're proposing tonight. And then Jen Garbley is also here as the city engineer. And we've been working on this project since, I guess we had our first meeting with our advisory committee and technical committee in October of 2023. I can't even believe it's been that long. Okay, so, but we're getting through it. And I think that now's the fun part because we're really getting to some maps. So this is the fun part, to be able to look at the maps. And we'll keep working through this and we'll come back to the commission several times before we move into adoption. And that should be towards the fall of this year. So we should be wrapping it up in the fall. And with that, I guess I'm going to hand it over to Matt to start out, or are you starting out, Ryan?
No, it's Matt.
It's Matt.
Can everyone, I guess first, can those online see the screen share?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks.
Oh, and I'm just going to make one note before we get started, is that the packets that you all received, we have updated some of the maps in those packets based on feedback that we got from the technical committee, advisory committee, and answering some of those questions. So just know that the maps that you'll see in the presentation on the screen are the most updated maps.
You're keeping us on our toes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, yeah, thanks for having me, everybody. Again, Matt Hugart with Kittleson and Associates. I'm just one of a handful of people working on this project, but I just was tasked with coming here this evening and helping give the overview. We have a short 47 or 48 slide presentation to give with you this evening.
To go with the 90-page package.
Yeah, and multiple memos in the hundreds of pages. So we'll try and get through as fast as we can. But the agenda, well, it's been some time since we last were here sharing the update. So presentation is really designed to kind of get you up to speed. I know some of you have been following the project a little bit more closely as participation on the advisory committee. But so for those of you that aren't, we'll try and fill you in as much as we can. What does that fill in look like? Well, we'll go through kind of quick overview of the existing conditions inventory maps that we've prepared. We'll talk a little bit about the performance measure selection. Last time we met, we were just getting into that topic, talking about what kind of performance measures city might want to select to help to identify and prioritize projects. Most of the meat of the presentation will be on the pedestrian and bicycle needs and gaps analysis. Quite a few maps that we'll present this evening will highlight that. And then recognizing that this is a multimodal plan and we don't want to forget about our other modes. We'll talk about roadway, transit, and freight needs and gaps. And then I think Brian will go in a little bit more detail about the proposed multimodal functional classification system that we're proposing as part of this TSP update and next steps. Okay, so what have we been up to since we last met? Well, we updated the existing conditions inventory. That was quite an effort. Most of that culminated in a lot of inventory maps. So we've mapped the pedestrian network, the bicycle network, the roadway, the freight, and the transit multiple iterations trying to refine and come up with the best ways to illustrate and summarize that data. It's all jumping off data for the rest of the project, but all TSPs require an updated inventory, and all this is done and has been updated in GIS, so it lives on for the city to update going forward into the future, city staff. We've mapped what's on the map on the screen there is the acronym PLTS and BLTS. And PLTS stands for pedestrian level of traffic stress, and BLTS stands for bicycle level of traffic stress. The LTS, or level of traffic stress, is one of the performance measures that we selected to help guide the development of the TSP. So we spent quite a bit of time trying to map and assess and then map those levels of traffic stress for most of the streets in the city. We developed and refined what we're calling priority focus areas, and I'll save the detail, but there's quite a few maps in the presentation that will summarize that. But instead of sort of relying upon pockets of defined underserved population groups in the city, because as we noted in some of our early stages of this project, we didn't find that to be highly measurable or highly identifiable. We came up with a different strategy to help focus our project selection and prioritization on these priority focus areas. So we'll go through that. We summarized the multimodal needs and gaps for all modes and developed the functional classification maps. So next slide, Ryan. Keep going. Okay, so a couple of the things that we've done that are more recent in terms of refinement is kind of looking at our key destinations. So this was an initial map that we created to identify destinations or businesses or community resources, if you will, that were important to the city. These were refined through staff level efforts, feedback we received from the public open house, multiple public open houses, and just overall knowledge of the city. And so everything you see identified on there is represented by a school, library, shopping center, kind of you name it. I won't go into a lot of the details, and I'll explain the importance of this map going forward in a few slides. By the way, stop me and ask questions as we go. I'm just going to keep plodding through this, knowing that we've got quite a few slides to get through today. So the next slide here is just a quick inventory of our pedestrian facilities. It's kind of detailed. It's hard to see some of the nuances, but it maps all of the sidewalks, and it kind of striates the designation of those sidewalks as whether or not it's an obstructed sidewalk or it's a sidewalk greater than 5 feet. So the different color coding on there identifies where you have sidewalks and where you don't. And as you can see, there's quite a few roadways and streets in the city that don't have sidewalks. And where you do have sidewalks, it's limited, mainly to your collectors and arterial streets and your newer local streets that were constructed under more recent design standards. But that summarizes the pedestrian facility. We included just a couple statistics in here that kind of shows what that looks like. So this is the percentage of your roadway functional classification designation that have sidewalks greater than 5 feet and that have no barriers. And what do I mean by barriers? That would be a utility pole in the sidewalk or some other obstruction that would prevent someone from easily walking down that sidewalk side by side or in using a mobility.
That would also include all the mailboxes that get put back in, yeah.
Yeah. So as you can see, there's pretty small percentage of each of those classifications of streets that have unobstructed sidewalks greater than 5 feet. So while this is a kind of a snapshot of what's out there today, I think it's, it's sort of a launching point for how to make this better going forward. So the idea behind including system completeness in your TSP is to give yourself a measuring stick going forward. So if you set a goal for by 2045, we want all of our neighborhood routes and collectors to at least be 50% complete, right? Then you can set a goal or an aspirational goal like that and have a measurable
measure against it.
Yeah, exactly. I won't go into the details here, but this is just the bicycle facilities where you have bike lanes or what we're calling on-street multi-use paths, like what's on Linwood, or buffered bike lanes or just bike lanes or some sort of multi-use pathway. So this shows all of the pathways and bike lanes on the city streets.
And I was a little curious on and recognizing this is existing conditions, but it might be helpful at some point for the city to get clear on what our bike map is. If you actually go to the city's website right now and find the Milwaukie bike map, you'll find a 2017 map that looks different than this. And this map might be what's in 2018 TSP update. And so I was just kind of instantly noticed the discrepancies between various map documents. And it would be great for us to get a single source of truth and not be presenting multiple versions of documents. So just want to kind of flag that as probably a website cleanup activity, but I think an important one.
Absolutely. Once we get these, all the TSP updated, we're going to definitely update some of those maps. And once we have the bicycle classifications, that'll be the map that's up there. So we'll get
Great.
there. Yeah.
And then I think I also had mentioned it a while back on an email with Mayor Beatty, as well as it might have even been former city manager Ann Ober. But, it would also be great if, from a mapping perspective, if the city's GIS analysts or others could get whatever we decide are our facilities up into some of the open source mapping databases that are out there, OpenStreetMap and others. And some of those systems are actually used to award who's got the greatest bike networks in the state of Oregon and things like that. And I know that there was, I thought of it because I saw it last year and we weren't listed really well in there. And I went and I looked in OpenStreetMap and we don't have a lot of facilities mapped. And some of that might be that we have greenways that don't actually look like greenways, so nobody's ever mapped that. But it's just something to kind of think about as we move forward.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We have one person who does GIS in this.
Yeah.
Yes, we agree.
Let's see, this is just a similar table that shows the bicycle system completeness and a little bit better results on the bicycle network, at least from your arterial perspective. About 69% of your miles of arterials are currently have some kind of a bike accommodation with mostly bike lanes, but not so great on the collectors and regional routes. So. Okay, so we talked a little bit about performance measures. Go ahead, next slide, Ryan. So we had identified the performance measures, primarily the performance measures of PLTS and BLTS for helping to guide this new TSP. Also, with the BLTS and PLTS, we have some other performance measures such as system completeness, hence the statistics I was just showing up on the screen, and then accessibility to transit. But I wanted to focus mostly on the BLTS and PLTS analysis because we spent quite a bit of time trying to document and map the results associated with that. So next slide. So this is a map that summarizes the current assessment of your existing bicycle facilities according to the level of traffic stress methodology. So the level of traffic stress methodology is, it's a way of kind of defining how well the system infrastructure is from the perspective of different user groups. So if you're a seasoned cyclist and has no concerns biking on McLaughlin Boulevard and feels very comfortable, your perception of that roadway is going to feel much different from someone who is just getting into cycling and is uncomfortable riding in traffic. So when you start to introduce different infrastructure elements into the mix, you can also assess how well or how stressful those facilities are for different user groups. So a BLTS1 is is a designation that most riders are going to find comfortable. So 10-year-olds and up, casual riders, seasoned riders. If you have a facility that is on its own right-of-way, it's like a multi-use path, like on Linwood, for example. Linwood is going to have a BLTS1. It's the least stressful, most comfortable form of infrastructure for biking. And then if you move to a scenario where, for example, you have a bike lane on McLaughlin, well, even though you might have your own bike lane on McLaughlin, the speeds on McLaughlin, the amount of traffic and the lack of a buffer between that bike lane and the adjacent vehicles, that's going to come up with a level of traffic stress of 4, simply because of those factors. And it doesn't really matter what kind of cyclist you are, you're going to find that more stressful than that separated facility. So.
And Matt, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second, only because I want folks that are looking in their packet, because if you can't see the map very well on the screen, if you look in your packet, the bicycle level of stress is figure 17, and it's on about page 45. Just want to try to keep let everybody know where it is in the packet, because it's hard to read the maps.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.
Thanks, yeah.
So if you go back to the map, yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think what we've done here is we had to, honestly, just to be transparent, we had to take a few leaps with some of the assessment here. So the level of traffic stress relies on a lot of different factors. You have to have a sort of a precise measurement of your bicycle facility. So if you have a bicycle lane, it works under this assumption that if you have less than a 5.5 foot bicycle lane, you're going to get a different result than if you have a greater than 5.5 foot bicycle lane. So in some instances, we were able to rely on some of our own measurements, and Ryan and his staff gracious enough to run out and quickly check a couple of locations and spot checks and facilities. But there are certainly some roadways where maybe that bike lane inches down less than 5 feet just due to some circumstantial narrowing of the lanes and other things. So there's some assumptions built in here, at least, that you've got some uniform widths through most of these corridors. We also went back and forth on some of the speed notations. So the posted speed limits, we were constantly refining those because we were finding errors in some of the old database files. So kind of constantly tweaking and cleaning this up, but this is the result of that effort. Now it's been, I think, amongst our two committees, kind of a source of debate on a lot of these facilities. And so I think we're here tonight to maybe talk about some of those. I think Commissioner Edge has some concerns, and I see his hand raised. So maybe this is a good time to let him speak. So.
Yeah, thank you. And, I'm sure that we don't want to spend too much of the meeting debating, individual facilities and individual perceptions of, what appropriate LTS, rating should be for a given facility. But, there's one, because it's an arterial in the city, it jumps out at me as just being patently wrong. And that's Lake Road as a BLTS 1. I just cannot agree that the facilities on Lake Road are that level of comfort for, a 10-year-old or even myself riding a bike on Lake Road. There's no protection. There's no vertical separation. It's literally just a paint separated bicycle lane on an arterial in the city. And so there's the relatively high traffic counts, I imagine, on Lake Road compared to a lot of our other streets. And so I'm just wondering, what I don't want to do is, again, kind of get into this nitpicking and personal perception and experience and everything. I would like to know kind of how did you arrive at the rating that you did for Lake Road, given its context? And then is there an opportunity to reconsider that? Maybe bump it up to a 2 or something. I mean, I just can't see how this is reflective of the experienced reality by people riding on the facilities on that street.
And maybe I'll just chime in to add that I agree with Commissioner Edge, and maybe I'll even nuance it. And I think the particular section between like Oatfield 35th and 224 is probably experienced very differently than, or east, so yeah, Oatfield and 35th east to 224 is probably very different than west of Oatfield 35th right there, where city recently did more paving. And I think that I don't even know if it is narrowed, but I think it does feel narrower based on how striping occurs. But I would also imagine that kind of the piece that I was just talking about, it still feels like even traffic speeds are a lot higher. My mom lives right down there. I go down there very often. I would also agree that's not the equivalent of Linwood multi-use path.
Yeah.
We've talked about this
Yeah.
so many times
So many
internally,
times.
just so you know. Yeah, so we can totally talk about that.
So thanks for Ryan taking me to the next slide here. So one of the limitations of a BLTS methodology that the state of Oregon has adopted, and I think a lot of communities in the state are currently using, is that the BLTS relies really on when you have a striped bicycle lane situation. It's not a mixed traffic, but it's an actual lane. Really, the only two variables that you use to assess that are how wide is the bike stripe or the lane itself, and are you greater than 5.5 feet or less, and then what is the speed of the facility that it's on. And in the condition of Lake Road, you are in a scenario where you're less than 30 miles an hour. Posted speed, correct. And the bike lane is at least 5.5 feet wide. In some segments in there, you have a buffered bike lane, so you actually have more than 5.5 feet. And then some sections right about where Rowe Middle School is, it narrows, but it's still at least 5.5 feet. So just based on those two variables, you get the BLTS1 score. Now, I fully admit that what we did here, and it's really, I think, a limitation of the resources that we have to put into this analysis, is this is a segment level analysis. And it's not looking at intersections along that corridor. So you can actually do a BLTS analysis on the segment itself from X to Y, and you can actually look at the score of the BLTS score as you navigate intersections. And the score could change depending upon the significance of the intersection. How wide is it? Is it signalized? Are there ways to get across the intersection that are more comfortable or less comfortable? And so the methodology clearly points out that if you have limitations on that corridor, to use a terrible word, it kind of ruins the score for the rest of the corridor, because if you're a cyclist on that corridor and you know that there's an intersection coming up, you might be fine on that segment arriving to the intersection, but if you're going to have trouble getting across that intersection, your stress level is going to increase in anticipation of having to navigate a narrower part of the roadway. So there is methodologies in the procedures that allow you to ratchet that score back based on a limitation. So within the segment of Lake Road, eliminating the intersection for a segment, if you look at Lake Road, yeah, certainly when you get close to 224, the score jumps from a BLTS or BLTS1 to a BLTS3. And that's a function of the speed changing and the bike lane striping kind of going away. It doesn't really go away, but you have more of a shoulder than an actual bike lane. And that's not a knock on anybody. It's just how it's been built and striped over the years. So you get that BLTS3. So I guess there's something we can chat about here tonight is, yeah, I agree that maybe not all of the segment of Lake Road is a BLTS1, but maybe where you have the buffered bike lane, it certainly feels at least like a BLTS2. At least perception wise. I actually wrote it myself, and I get what Commissioner Edge is referring to. I certainly wouldn't want my younger children when they were that age riding out there, but the methodology is the methodology. So I think there's some flexibility with what we can do with it. But then again, it opens up a sort of a can of worms, because then we got to reapply that methodology elsewhere and be consistent if there are other segments that we might want to take another look at it. It kind of opens up the door to having to do that. So we either rely on the black and white nature of the methodology, or we build in some cleansing of it, if you will, based on perception and reality. So.
I have a question. One of the things that I have, I can see in Lake Road because I live really nearby it, and I use that, and I'm one of my neighbor's kids, and they go to the school, and even crossing that in there, they can spend hours and no one will give them. It's very dangerous. Anyway, I would not trust any of my kids to even go down there. It's that the lack of sidewalk in some areas. So the lack of sidewalk give you sometimes so that was going to be part of my question. I don't see anything here that relates. It relates to the side of the lane, but doesn't tell you what's next to it. Like sometimes when you have a sidewalk, it feels safer because you kind of have something next to it. So and that's what I was going to ask you. Like if the sidewalk doesn't feel like it's anywhere here playing a role in the level, because sometimes when you don't have a sidewalk and you're inside a neighborhood, that is fine. But when you're in a road that it has a higher speed, but it is no sidewalk, you're sharing the lane with people walking in there, people walking on the street, you're sharing the lane with anybody in a wheelchair, and you're biking with you're in a kind of supposed to be 25, and everybody goes to 30, 35 in that street anyway. And even next to this, so I don't know. My question was going to be about. I understand that you saw the methodology, but can the sidewalks also be some pointing here in the measurement?
Yeah, and maybe we could go back to the PLTS map, which I think you had on the slides, and just maybe look at that really fast. Maybe that was just a slide or two back, or maybe we haven't gotten there. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping the.
We haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Well, maybe we hold that then, and we can look at that, because I guess because BLTS is looking at cycling facilities specifically, whether that be a multi-use path or in the curb zone.
I think though that I believe Commissioner Famayor, though, is saying that because there is a lack of a sidewalk on part of Lake Road, which there is a big stretch that there's not that sidewalk, that folks
increases the stress.
Right.
Yeah.
And so folks are walking in the bike lane as opposed to.
Yeah.
So it's stressful. So I guess I would just say overall, Lake Road has been brought up many times by many people. And I think that we're not going to die on the sword. The methodology isn't perfect. It doesn't feel like a BLTS 1. It should be at least a BLTS 2. And we're totally fine with changing the designation on that.
Sure. Okay, great. And maybe, thanks. I appreciate as well. And maybe it's not throwing the methodology out, but it's tweaking and customization, like acknowledging some of these, unique characteristics, and maybe looking at it more closely because, is it a 2 or is it a 3? I don't. So maybe that's something you all can look at a little bit more.
Well, we have looked at a whole bunch. Just so you know. So,
but I think it's really important, and sorry to cut you off, just of setting it as a 1 impacts all the analysis that flows through later in terms of project selection and all sorts of things. It doesn't actually
impact it that much, but I do believe that putting it as a BLTS 2, because we have looked at it according to the analysis that is used, it's a PLTS 1, right? Those are just the facts. But we recognize that on the ground, it doesn't feel like that, and people don't experience it like that. So we're completely fine with moving it up to a BLTS 2, or if people in the room say, well, this is a 3, even though that's getting very far away from the methodology, it seems like a BLTS 2 would be more kind of in the wheelhouse of what we would be wanting to call it. That would be my take on it.
I agree. And what I was going to ask was when you were saying about influence projects or future of this road or anything, especially intersection, wouldn't that be part of that effect? Like if what would you add or not add in specific intersections with that level of stress that you are assigning? Just a regular question. I don't know if that.
I mean, I don't know if we're necessarily there yet. Commissioner Foyt-Mayor in terms of thinking about like
Okay.
specific interventions. But I think I'm worried that, and I'm sure others who have raised a similar question, that by saying it's a BLTS 1, it meets our target, which means it doesn't need additional interventions, which I think many of us would agree is wrong, that it does need some interventions. And so saying it's at least a BLTS 2 then is going to change everything that flows from that to say, yeah, it could be better. And I think everyone, I'm seeing heads in the room shaking from staff as well that agree that that this section of Lake Road could be better. And so I think we should at least set it as BLTS 2. And is it a 2 or a 3? Maybe that's a lot of nuance. And I honestly would probably look more to staff to make that decision than us as Planning Commission. But Vice Chair Edge, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just one more comment on this. I'm really a big fan of methodologies and sticking to methodologies and not calling audibles just because, of some, popular sentiment. However, I think that this is really appropriate here for Lake Road. And so, to be, reconsidering, the rating that's come out of the methodology for this particular site for this segment. So, but maybe we can just, because the city is relatively small and we have relatively few arterials, maybe it's appropriate to, do a little bit more of a, deeper look and, have a deeper, maybe more of a qualitative, consideration rather than just purely a quantitative consideration when it goes into the LTS rating that we choose for arterials and regional routes, perhaps, just because there are so few of them and they're busy and it's just it's obviously the rating of 1 is legitimate because that's the methodology and part of my argument with the methodology, and I don't think it's granular enough at 4 different ratings. But that's not for the city to decide. It's not a matter of we're using ODOT's methodology. The problem is to be solved there, and then we'll work with it in the future. But yeah, I think at least if we could be a little bit more qualitative when it comes to our more major streets, I think that is an appropriate diversion from the methodology in our case. So thank you.
Great.
I have a quick question. And this is, again, methodology, and I understand what you're saying. It's because that's what my question was about the sidewalk, is that could be part of the methodology. It's unincorporated that into that as one more variance into that. Another question I had was about the users in that area, like specific, like that road has specifically 2 schools, right? So is that any of that could be part of that methodology? Like what is it that is part of that process? So again, just a question.
And Commissioner Foyt-Mayor, we have a whole nother layer of analysis around schools
Okay.
and all. We have got a whole nother level. We'll show you a bunch of different maps and how that
Sounds good. I would just wait here, sit up and
But
wait
you're,
here.
on,
That's right.
you're thinking properly, though. You're on the right track.
And it's only 7:10.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
thanks for the discussion on that. I appreciate it. And we can, it sounds like we can keep moving forward. You've heard our feedback on this specifically. And I think as others have said, I think it's taking the methodology, applying it. I think what you're hearing from us and others is generally the methodology looks like it makes sense. There's a targeted place where the methodology doesn't feel right. And so I appreciate that you all are willing to consider that more in a more fine-grained qualitative way.
Okay, let's just round out the BLTS discussion. So what does all this mean? Well, I think as we go forward, we're going to set a target for ourselves, right? We want all of our facilities to have a certain BLTS, regardless of what kind of facility it is. And that's our aspirational target. As of right now, based on discussions with our committees, we have set a target of BLTS 1 for all of our facilities. That could be open for discussion, but it kind of begs the question is what does it take to get to BLTS in some situations? So Ryan, if you can maybe move that screen down a little bit.
And,
Yeah.
and I guess maybe going back to the map real fast, another kind of, not a tweak, just I guess a question that I kind of had when I was looking at this. You know, you see McLaughlin, Southeast McLaughlin coming south of town, you know, BLTS 4. You see a section of Southeast Johnson Creek Boulevard, BLTS 4, with both, and I agree, they are. Like, I wouldn't get on my bike and ride down them. But you know what I would do instead? I would get on the Springwater Corridor 50 feet away, and I would get on the trolley trail 50 feet away. And I just worry, does like thinking about them as BLTS 4s, which I guess they are, did that at some point help us have a weird conversation of like, should we be putting a protected bike lane on McLaughlin Boulevard in order to improve it to a level 1, which seems like a preposterous conversation because we have a separated multi-use path right on the side. So it's a thought experiment question, but when you look at this map and you see how an analysis is going to flow from it, that's where I'm kind of wondering.
Well, if you look really closely at the BLTS map, you'll see we actually did map the Springwater Corridor and the trolley trail adjacent to.
I'm gonna get my new reading glasses.
Yeah, you have to get your magnifying glass out, but we do have those.
Okay, so that is then the
identified.
blues right next to, okay,
Yeah.
okay, great.
So yeah, and that's maybe a lead into the next slide is what does it take to get to BLTS 1 on some of these facilities? Well, it takes a lot. All right, it takes a Springwater trail and a Springwater corridor and a trolley trail adjacent to those types of facilities. You know, when you have the speeds, the volumes, and the uncomfortable sort of high volume, high stress scenarios. So for those arterials, yeah, you got to put some really serious infrastructure in, separated infrastructure. But the nice thing about it is you can get to BLTS 1 on a lot of parallel facilities. You know, for example, your local streets. Most of those are BLTS 1, and it may seem odd, but they're BLTS 1, even though they don't have bike lanes, but they're low volume. You know, less than 500 vehicles, 1,000 vehicles a day in most cases. That methodology gives you a pretty low stress environment, even though you don't have striped bicycle lanes or even sharrows on the streets themselves. So you can kind of get to BLTS 1 by relying upon your parallel local streets in many situations, and that might be enough to help offset your inability to really kind of realistically put that really serious infrastructure on some of your arterials. And you'll see that in some of the mapping that we'll share.
And I think to your point, Chair Sherman, is that those projects, doing a project, on 99 or on Johnson Creek isn't going to rise to the top because we already know that we have the parallel, right? So you're not going to get a project that rises to the top because you've already got the infrastructure there. But we are saying though that those roads themselves, as in their classification, they do not have any facilities on them. And also recognizing, like on Johnson Creek Boulevard, when the county comes in and redoes Johnson Creek Boulevard, thinking about how that is going to work is like, it is a dangerous place for bicycles to get from cross streets. It's really dangerous. So if we're saying, it's like, we want to alert them to say, this is bad if you're trying to get from the north side to the south side, and there needs to be some things that are done to improve that experience, but it won't rise to the top of any of the projects in our list. Yeah.
I'd also say from McLaughlin, we're not going to put those facilities on there, but we want the crossings, right? We want to be able to get into Milwaukie. And so by saying, hey, you've got problems on your road, it puts stress on ODOT to, need to make those improvements. So that's where we want to focus it on.
See next slide, right? Here's just a couple of examples. So here's Johnson Creek Boulevard. And it shows, if you just kind of look at the width of the bike lane stripe, for the most part, it's about 5.5 feet based on the speed of less than 30 miles an hour or less than or equal to 30 miles an hour. It just pops up as a BLTS2, and that's the methodology. Now, it may not feel like a BLTS2 to some people, but that's the methodology. And if you go to the next slide, I think we got one more. Nope, sorry, it was on the previous one. but a local road, would give you a BLTS one. So this is just a tool. We've mapped, and I think with the exception of Lake Road, I think at the moment, we're pretty good on most of the map segments for the rest of the city, and we'll use that going forward to help identify projects. So. Okay, so real quickly, not going into maybe as extreme detail, but the PLTS also was mapped, and this is a little bit more of a busier map, as you can see. A couple things to point out is if you have no sidewalks, it's a PLTS 4. Because you have a lot of local streets in the city that don't have sidewalks, they're automatically showing up in that black red line scenario. So that's why this map looks a lot busier, but as you can see, there's still a lot of PLTS 2s, 3s, and 4s on this network. And again, this is a tool, and we'll use it to help identify, improvement projects where we're not meeting, an aspirational or target of PLTS 2 or greater. So.
Figure 14 in the packet, approximately page 30.
Yep.
Thank you. I was trying to find it.
Yeah. So as we've gone through our committees, I think most of our committees and all of us on the project team believe that a PLTS 2 target is appropriate for the city of Milwaukee. And so what does it take to get to PLTS 2? So these tables on the screen here just show a lot of the different variables, but it's based on really the width of the sidewalk itself. And more importantly, is there an obstruction in that sidewalk? You can have a 10-foot sidewalk, but if it's got obstructions that prevent someone in a wheelchair or mobility device from navigating that sidewalk, it's going to get the PLTS 4 designation. So we got a couple of slides that illustrate that. Ryan, if you want to go forward. Okay, so here's a quick map that the purple colors here show a couple of different examples to kind of illustrate that point. So the next slide, Ryan, is Roswell. So Roswell's on the north side of town. It serves Ardenwald Elementary. It comes off of 32nd, and this is looking east on Roswell. Ardenwald Elementary is kind of off in the distance. You can just kind of barely make out some of the frontage of that school. But it's got a pretty decent sidewalk. It's, greater than 4 feet. And it's a, fairly decent sidewalk in terms of surface condition. But unfortunately, you can see it's got a couple of different barriers in it. So even though it's a 4-foot sidewalk, it has those barriers, and it unfortunately then gets the PLTS 4 designation. So had those barriers not be there, it would be a PLTS 2. So. Here's an example of a more recent improvement that engineering staff have just finished up. So this is a segment of Monroe, and it's got a pretty wide sidewalk. It's got a buffer associated with the multi-use pathway right next to it. It also has a landscaping buffer, and it has an on-street parking buffer. So that width of the sidewalk plus that buffer that separates the pedestrian zone from the adjacent vehicular lanes creates a pretty low stress environment from a walking standpoint. And so this is a really nice extreme example of a PLTS 1. So. Okay, so I kind of rifled through that pretty quickly, but I think we got some good feedback. Any other questions about PLTS and BLTS before we move on?
Probably, I might have others when we maybe want to get more detailed, but yeah, not at a high level.
Okay. All right. So now we'll kind of transition into the needs. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Quick. Is this also including the projects that are going on right now for the sidewalks that are being improved, or are just like before the improvement? Like the area where I live, they just made some changes to the sidewalk, improved some areas. They're doing some new sidewalks that are actually the same width as the sidewalk rather than expanding the sidewalk. But like there's some changes in there and around the Washington Street and that near Oak. So those kind of improvements are included into this map, those changes for the level pedestrian stress?
No, the projects aren't. The current projects aren't included in that list because
Okay.
they're not completed yet. So,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Unless the concrete got poured last night, it's as updated as it's going to get. So yeah, it's just
They did.
existing conditions. So.
Did get poured that night.
They did get poured last night, actually.
Washington hasn't been added.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
anything that's under construction right now is not included in these maps.
Yeah, that's fine, that's good.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. So the bike and ped needs and gaps analysis. I'll start this section off with what I had kind of alluded to earlier is one of the things we identified early on in this project is we needed some way to help prioritize the different geographies of the city. Part of that is due to the new planning rules that the state of Oregon has adopted, where they want a lot more emphasis on equity and a lot more emphasis on serving underserved population groups. As we noted earlier, going through the kind of the community profile is Milwaukee's pretty unique in the sense that it's fairly homogeneous from an income level, from a demographic level, from a race perspective. There's not defined and concentrated pockets of certain profiles. So that presents some challenges, and it also prevents some, or gives us some ability to kind of be unique in our planning process. So how do we get around that, that nuance? So one of the things we developed are these priority focus areas. And the focus areas that we had settled on are defined as the Milwaukie Town Center, which is the defined town center adopted by the city and recognized by Metro as an area of the city where you should have much denser development. You should have great ability to walk and bike, and there should be great access to transit. And for the most part, your Milwaukie Town Center is doing just that. And Metro and the state of Oregon would love to see Milwaukie continue to focus on developing and densifying that area. So it becomes, at least in the perspective of the Metro area, a really important center for making sure that our infrastructure is as best as we can make it. But we also recognize that it's not just about the town center, it's a pretty small part of the city. So we as a committee and staff believe that schools is of equal or perhaps even greater importance to the larger community. Our transit lines and the stops that exist along those transit lines are also important because of that regional accessibility that transit provides. Our parks are important. Our grocery and retail centers, our shopping centers are important. Our underserved land uses are also important. And we define underserved land uses as low-income housing and senior centers. And what's the third one, Laura?
Wichita Center Community Center.
Yeah, the community centers, thank you. So those were all kind of debated and defined amongst our committees as how we should be helping to identify and prioritize projects. Any deficiency or gap in the system that exists within a walking vicinity of one or more of these priority focus areas is going to get just that, is going to be a priority for helping to define and identify projects. So we mapped the BLTS and PLTS thresholds that we had defined earlier. We just lost our screen.
Was it here or was it in there? I saw something like fade out. Joseph or Ernestina, can you hear us?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
We've lost AV or the TVs in here, so.
But can you all see the PowerPoint still?
No, it doesn't.
no,
Okay.
it's disappear.
It does input no.
We see the room.
You see the.
You see
Yeah.
the room?
Okay.
Okay.
We see you guys.
We see you as well now.
Well, now we see you.
TVs
It
are
was-
working, but now
It was just black screens. That was a little scary.
Oh,
Sorry, hang on a sec.
restarting the screen share. All right, pick it back up.
that's good.
All right, here we go, back to start. So we mapped the BLTS and PLTS thresholds within the vicinity of those each of those focus areas. So Ryan, if you want to go to the next slide.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
If you don't mind. You mentioned something that it caught my attention when you said that the population and it's very, how do you say, like homogeneous, like that is, that you don't have pockets of different cultural communities within this is what you wanted to say within the Milwaukie. I just want to understand where you wanted to say that you don't have a specific area where like some communities are together. Is that what you were saying?
I think what Matt was saying was that when we did our community profile, we were largely relying on data, demographic data. Let me step back a moment. The new planning rules that the state has laid out for communities like ours to use when we're updating our transportation system plans, it identifies what they describe as underserved populations, and it enumerates those groups that have been sort of harmed by transportation and land use planning decisions in the past. And it says communities, when you're doing updates to your transportation system plans, you need to take special attention and dedicate resources to involving those groups in your planning process. You also need to identify where there might be sort of clusters of folks from those communities living within your city. For Milwaukie, when we did that analysis, one of the challenges that we had, and I suspect other communities will have as well, is that sort of the rules tell us to use the best available data. Well, for us and for a lot of communities, that comes from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey. And one of the challenges is when you start getting down to the smaller sort of geographies that the U.S. Census Bureau uses, like the census tract level. We're not a completely homogenous community. We have a lot of folks who live in Milwaukie who identify, with those characteristics identified in the new state rules, those underserved populations. What was challenging for us is we just weren't able to identify any sort of like concentrations, with the idea being that sort of you're then paying special attention to like, the investments that you're making in those areas, or maybe the burdens that come along with introducing some certain types of transportation facilities. And so it's not that I think what Matt was saying is it's not that we aren't, that we don't have diversity within Milwaukie. It was more just that we don't have data that's good enough to be able to tell, if there are, concentrations of folks in Milwaukie. Go ahead.
So I understand what you're telling me. So you're telling me that the data you have doesn't show that information. In that case, you didn't find that, but we have them.
Totally. And so what we did...
We totally have them, and very clear. And we had many community meetings where many of these populations and these groups reflect their completely lack of transportation, lack of things, all the things that we discussed, especially the Spanish-speaking community, where I sit down with them in all our meetings that we had, the community meetings. I was one of the ones that was sitting with them, supporting them, and I completely hear all their needs. We had separate meetings to discuss many of the things on the code, and I just wanted, it sounded like we didn't have them, and then if we didn't have to, you didn't. I just wanted to be clear that it sounded like this was not part of the process. So I understand that the process was to take the data that is by the U.S. Census, the census, which might not be accurate as to what we have living in here. However, I feel like there is, and then in that case, I was waiting to hear when you're going to say, how do you come up with the answer to resolve this process? If that's what I was waiting for, but I haven't heard that. Are you going to get to that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that point, and thank you for raising it. I think one of the ways that we tried to overcome, and one of this sort of challenge with the data And one of the ways that, I think Clackamas County has done this as well in certain instances when it's been difficult to say with any certainty where there might be a cluster of underserved folks, is to sort of use certain land uses as a proxy. And so that's where what Matt was talking about in sort of identifying locations like Hillside Manor, for example, where we know there's going to be a lot of affordable housing, and low income, low wealth populations are one of the identified underserved groups. And so identifying Hillside as a priority area and where we need to, focus investments, that is sort of an example of where we've sort of said, yeah, there's a limitation in the data, but we do know this. And, similar with, Wichita Center, we know that folks are going there to receive services. And so we know that that's important. So using some of these land uses and developments where we know that there are for sure going to be underserved folks as a proxy in light of the sort of data limitations that we have. But do appreciate you raising the point.
Thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, I just wanted to make the point too.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
the record in there so that how things are measured and where we at. So thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just staying on the theme for a quick moment, I think I was also had kind of from a public involvement perspective, I know we have our Transportation System Plan Advisory Committee as probably our primary public involvement, but I wasn't sure to what extent you all are thinking about if or at what point we engage maybe the city's equity committee in some conversations or review of the plan as it's evolving. So I don't know if there's anything you could share there.
Yeah, sure. We started out and we talked to the Equity Steering Committee at the beginning of the process. We also have somebody who's on the Equity Steering Committee who's on the Advisory Committee, although he just stepped down last week because he doesn't have time to do it anymore. Okay. And then we're also in constant, we were actually talked to Gabriella, who is our liaison to the ESC, the Equity Steering Committee, and talking to her a lot about when is the best time to engage, because they have their own agenda and they have their own work, and they're really mostly, I think, from talking to Gabriella, it's like, well, when are you going to have projects that we can talk about? So we really have been actively trying to keep that dialogue open and trying to figure out the best time to engage. And so we were just talking to her, and we're excited because we'll have projects this summer. And that is when we just today, I was like, we're going to get on the agenda. She's like, yes. So we're doing the best that we can, but it just, citywide, it's hard to get people as engaged with the transportation system plan. I think as we've.
I think once you have projects, people will
exactly
be showing up.
That's why I'm excited about having projects. So I think that people will be able to dig into it a little bit more. And with it, instead of being esoteric BLTS and PLTS, it's hard to get people super engaged.
But this is close, one step closer to the ground than visions and goals and objectives.
Yeah.
So we're getting there. Really appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Fuenmayor. I will hand it back to Matt.
Okay. So again, here's just another map of the gaps as defined under the pedestrian level of traffic stress. So the deficiencies shown here in black, you have no sidewalks. In red is where we're not meeting the aspirational target of PLTS2. So you can see there's a lot of black and red on there. So what does it look like when we start to overlay this with these priority focus areas? Now, there's 7 more slides here, and I'm going to show these to you in kind of rapid fire succession here.
Maybe before we start, are you ready to start advancing?
Well, I'll pause. Sure.
I'll pause. Thank you. I appreciate it. I just wanted to flag, I'm fairly certain the challenging intersection for pedestrians highlighted just north of Hillside on this map is 29th and Balfour. I'm pretty sure you actually mean it to be at 32nd and Harvey. So it might be, I think that's just a minor GIS map adjustment, but you might want to just take a note of that and check on your own.
Thank you. Yeah, noted.
Yep.
So thank you. Okay, so what does it look like when we start to overlay these on our priority focus areas? So Ryan, just kind of rifle through them. So this is the Milwaukie Town Center. So it's just highlighting the town center and turning off all the others. This is the this is schools. So this is all elementary, middle, high school, and post high school schools within the city boundaries. So there are quite a few, but there are sort of islands on the system if you look at it. The next, Ryan, these are grocery stores and shopping centers, so the two big ones. We didn't include all the little smaller
Corner stores.
but the big ones. These are the neighborhood hubs, so the defined neighborhood hubs that the city staff has been working with the community on. These are the transit lines and the stops. So I should point out that the blue shading represents a quarter-mile walk distance to each of those stops. And then backing up to some of those other groups, they also represent quarter-mile walking distances on the street network. So those are as you can walk, not as you can
Yeah,
fly,
not
walk,
crow
right?
fly,
Yeah.
but actual walking, yeah.
These are all the parks, and we got quite a bit of feedback at our last open house on the parks locations. So I think this is a pretty comprehensive look at almost all of the official and unofficial parks in the city. The next one is, so I can't read that. Underserved, yeah, these are the underserved groups. So the senior center, the resource centers, and the hillside low-income housing.
And this resource center, does this Wichita, sorry, I'm looking down Rusk, is Bonaventure, which is like nearly built? Okay, down, yeah, okay.
And I think the last one, okay, yeah. So then what does it mean when you put all these together? So this is what we call a heat map, or a blue map in this case. And the darker gradients of blue show how those focus areas are overlapping with each other. So you can see, there's a pretty dark concentration of blue along the 32nd, the King, and the downtown town center area. And then you've got sort of no blues showing up in that northeastern corner and parts of the southeastern corner where, those are just primarily residential neighborhoods. It's not that we don't value those neighborhoods. It's just from a focus area, there just happens to be none of the defined focus areas residing within, those areas. So you can kind of see where the concentrations lie and where the concentrations are waning based on the overlapping. And again, this is another tool. So it kind of helps us prioritize and focus our efforts going forward in terms of where do we feel like we need to make the most infrastructure improvements using this kind of a map system. So
Great. I guess a comment that I had on this, and I don't know if it came up at the Transportation System Plan Advisory Committee. I have some concerns on the school walk shed, and I guess it's also extends into the school bike shed. So I know we're using a quarter-mile walk shed. I wanted to point out for the record that I think elsewhere we use 1 mile for transit as our walk shed. So there's a pretty big difference between those things. But perhaps even most importantly, North Clackamas School District uses 1 mile as the walk shed for which they don't provide bus service. So, a quarter mile seems extra small in that sense when the reality on the ground is if you live 1 mile as you can walk or less from the school, you're not going to get on the bus. And so you either are walking or you're biking or your parents are driving you. And that would really, and that's for elementary schools. So, that would really change the map. And I just think maybe we should consider some adjustments to that buffer to reflect the reality of the level of service that the school district is providing and probably will be providing for the foreseeable future.
Thank you for that comments. It was similar comments were raised in our advisory committees as well. I think the reality of the school one is a little hard to visualize. If you want to go back to the school real quick, Ryan. is the schools are, not only are they defined sort of as islands, as you see on the map there, but they have specific boundaries. So the boundary of Ardenwald, for example, doesn't go south of, I believe it's Monroe, if I remember right. And then some of those other boundaries are cut off by certain streets, right? Even though the street might be relatively close, if you don't live within the vicinity of that, or on one side of that street, then that boundary is going to look a lot different. If we were to make this a half mile or even a mile for that matter, you just see blue covering the entire city. So the effectiveness of maybe a smaller buffer at least helps to prioritize at least the reality or the limitations that the city is going to be facing when it would get to the project side. Is we're just not going to have a ton of money to throw at every one of these gaps, right? So maybe the focus is, at least from our perspective, is let's focus on those streets that provide the immediate service to those schools, recognizing that probably in most cases, most parents or most families who live beyond that quarter mile or even half mile that are still within that buffer, they're probably doing something like driving their kids, or in some cases, busing if it's provided. So we recognize it's a limitation, point noted. I don't know if we've got a really strong case for going much higher than a quarter mile at the moment, but certainly something that can be discussed.
Well, I mean, I think our comprehensive plan would push us to that vision of being able to walk safely and bike safely to school more than a quarter mile away. But Commissioner Fuenmayor, I see your hands up.
Yes, could you go back to that map when everything is overlapped? My question is more about what are the, talking again about the other topic that I was mentioning before about different minority groups or marginalized communities, and how this maps, how it relates to that. Do you know? Did you relate it to that a bit? And like, what if there's anything on those gaps that relates to those marginalized communities that are not being served? Like, I just want to have some curiosity around that topic.
Yeah, I can weigh in. I mean, it's factored in insofar as just what I was discussing previously in terms of sort of using some of the land uses as a proxy, which is what we're showing here on this screen. These are areas in town where we in some cases we do know, with some of the affordable housing developments, we do know that, there are underserved populations that are living there. And then not just living there, we've also identified, we mentioned previously, Wichita, the Wichita Center, Community Center there on King is a location where you're likely to, see underserved groups visiting that location. So this was that, that last slide that we're looking at here, this map was an input in creating this map. So, it was included in that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just think it will be interesting to see how some other commercial center or anything that that services these areas are being connected or interconnected, and where are we as a community supporting this community? What are we doing to increase or improve the lives of the people that are being underserved? So
absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Ryan, you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so that was, go ahead.
Well, I just think I want to just circle back for a second because I don't think we really resolved this quarter mile thing,
Well,
right?
I mean, I realize quarter mile is big difference, whole map.
It's the whole map. That's
blue.
that's the,
But I don't know if it ends up again cascading through and changing project scores and things like that later on down the line. And again, maybe a mile is too much, but it does feel like maybe I don't know, feels like a quarter mile. Like we live further than a quarter mile from our school and my kids walk.
Yeah.
When we don't get bus service,
Right,
right? And they walk by themselves, 8-year-old, 10-year-old.
right.
So, it's just, I do think people do that.
Yeah.
And I do think when we look at our comprehensive plan, vision and goals, like that is exactly the kind of thing we want, a transportation system that enables our children to walk to school safely by themselves. So, I get what you're saying, Matt, about maybe prioritizing some investments within that, most immediate and adjacent area. And at the same time, once we fill those gaps, probably want to start building out. And I think a quarter mile doesn't get you towards that build out. But I see Jen's coming on the mic as well.
No, I mean, I agree. I got kids that can't walk to school and they actually take the bus, but just because we're just barely a mile away. But I'm in a different community. However, like, what is it? The one just above King Road? Llewellyn crosses King Road. So that's been on my topic for a long time, but that doesn't meet we don't cross, like your quarter mile doesn't get you to King Road, showing that you need those improvements.
Where the half mile probably would.
Yeah.
And it would probably help plus up a project.
But I am doing the work, right?
Yeah.
So I am about ready to put out a project for King Road, but that's just one example of how like this could be your deficiency by only going a quarter mile for.
So maybe it's just something where you all can, again, think about it and think about as a different buffer amount, maybe slightly more appropriate.
Okay. We can think about it.
Okay, we did the same thing with the bike. So this is just our bike gaps as previously noted, and we went through the same exercise of the different focus areas for time and efficiency purposes. I'm not going to show all of those, but Ryan will take us to the next slide, which is the summation of all of those deficiencies within that defined area. So again, whether you agree or not, this is all, again, using the quarter mile.
Yeah.
So it looks a lot different. And I guess I understand, why, most people probably aren't biking at least a quarter mile. Their reach on a bicycle is much longer than a quarter mile. So it, could lend to some modification that we can go back and look at. But this is what the bike needs and gaps looks like overlaid on the priority focus areas as of today.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I just also want to acknowledge, I like the robustness of the analysis, and I think it'll be really helpful for when you have to have conversations about trade-offs and priority and all of that. So want to say I appreciate the work that's been done and gone into this. Also wanted to note on the map prior that same difficult connection that I talked about, I think is again also supposed to be shifted over. So any planning commissioners have any questions on this? Because I'm assuming we're going to pivot to another topic next. All right, great.
Okay, so that was a sneak peek or a really quick overview of how we identified needs and gaps on the network from the bicycle and pedestrian perspective. But we also know this is a multimodal TSP. So how did we deal with the vehicular and freight components? That was a kind of it's a lot of different things went into it. So we had a handful of intersections where we took a deeper dive into the operations drive is probably right.
It is right.
Into the operations of those intersections, looking at traffic volumes during peak time periods and assessing the adequacy of those intersections from a capacity or from a level of service standpoint. I think most of the effort went into really just reviewing your existing TSP. It's still a functioning TSP. It's not out of date by any means in terms of the project list. A lot of those projects there's still quite a few on there that are unconstructed. Doesn't mean that they're bad projects. They just didn't rise to the level of funding at the moment, but we started with those projects and tried to reassess the validity of those going forward into this next round of update. And then we gathered feedback from city staff in our committees to help refine that. So these next several slides are really they're just kind of blank slides, but we overlaid on them a lot of what we heard back through our own research of your existing TSP and the feedback we got from our committees and city planning and engineering staff. So don't necessarily have time and want to go over every one of these call out boxes, but they identify, at least on this map, where we have specific gaps when it comes to the accommodation of freight. And I think that's mostly motor vehicle freight on the system today. So. Ryan, next slide. So these are what we're calling our intersection control gaps and needs. So in most cases identified here, these would be intersections that have some limitation, whether it's pedestrian crossing limitations at a signalized intersection or lack of some kind of crossing enhancement, or some kind of a deficiency in the intersection itself from a vehicular standpoint, whether it's a capacity deficiency or it's a turning movement deficiency for certain vehicle types or a geometric deficiency. So this is a map that identifies at least all the known high priority deficiencies to date.
Vice Chair Edge, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wasn't sure if this was the right time to bring this up, but I did relay some questions to staff, or at least, signal that I was interested in these two maps that we just looked at, because there's three, on each map, there's three, suggested solutions that, kind of correlate with each other on the other map. And so we have the rail crossing at Harrison. We also have the Harrison at 224, intersection, if you on the next map. And then we have the two on 37th, at the same railroad and expressway intersection. Those are a little further spaced apart. And then we have the Harmony Linwood Railroad intersection and rail crossing as well. But in particular, the first and the third on those, because I guess, really 37th is, pretty far spaced there from the railroad. The expressway and the railroad are kind of far spaced. But what are the implications of doing, these projects? And particularly when you're talking about grade separating rail crossings, which maybe wasn't suggested for 37th, but, I've seen kind of, like a suggestion of dead ending 37th at the expressway, for instance, rather than reconfiguring the intersection. And so just kind of curious, what are the implications of these solutions? And, and I can get into more detail on what my questions are, but these are big projects, particularly the Harrison and Harmony, solutions. And so these warrant like a pretty big planning effort, each of them, I think, in terms of trying to determine, impacts and, the solutions and I'll call this out just as kind of the scale of, my concern here. To kind of put that in perspective is when we were talking about, routing, trying to tie the 29th Avenue Greenway to the central Milwaukie bikeway connection, basically that we had come before the planning commission before, and there was some ambiguity, about the right route, what route we should recommend, and what route would be adopted. And one of the things that we were told there was that if there was grade separation of the rail crossing at Harrison, that would disconnect 32nd Avenue from Harrison and at that intersection. So that's kind of a big deal. And I just wanted to kind of, call that out as like, we really should, consider this, the kind of the scope of the impacts here and kind of prepare for a planning effort, around that, really like maybe a TGM grant funded planning effort around something like that, if that's what's going to be recommended out of this process, because that's a big deal. And there's a lot of, transit and as well as bike, pedestrian, freight, and general purpose traffic considerations, and business access considerations and the public safety building and, all of that right there kind of clustered around, those Harrison, right there, where the grade separation would occur. And so, that's a big deal. And I wanted to call that out and see if there's any feedback from staff on that, or see if maybe the other commissioners had any other comments about the projects I'm calling out.
I would say I'm not working on the Harrison and rail crossing at the moment, and not even considering that one at the moment. The one that we're really focusing on is Harmony, Linwood, and Lake Road. We have a high amount of crashes that happen at that intersection. It is actually our highest. So, but you're right, it's probably going to be about a $50 to $100 million project.
And that's why it's probably not ever going to be realistically a real project that's going to get built anytime in the near future, or even.
So yeah, we're doing a planning effort with Clackamas County at the moment. That's like the next step to see what we can do to look at federal grants in order to move that forward.
Are you talking about the Harmony one, or you're talking about the one? Yeah, well, I was talking about
Harmony.
the other one that
Harrison's not even being touched right now.
right. It's not that's what I was trying to get around, is that
So-
Yeah.
we won't be going after a grant anytime soon, or even, because it's not going to be. It's a project that is going to be so expensive that I don't know exactly where the funding would ever come from.
For Harrison?
For Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, it also,
Yeah.
there's so many constraints.
Yeah.
As well. It
Yeah.
seems challenging.
Yeah.
I guess, helpful to kind of hear planning effort maybe underway on thinking about alternate, your options on Harmony. So Joseph, I don't know if you have anything else on that. I did actually think it was an interesting question to ask about, 37th Avenue rail crossing of, is that also maybe a potential crossing elimination as opposed to a crossing upgrade? I mean.
At Harmony?
No, 37th. So right
Yeah.
at Minthorn Springs. I mean, seems like the transportation system would probably continue to function pretty well. But that's a different question as opposed to an upgrade, just a simple, or making the other choice. But Joseph, I didn't know if you had anything else on the topic, I guess, or staff or consulting team does.
No, nothing specific. It's just, these look so innocuous, right? With just little circles with a little call out box, and it's not even a complete sentence suggesting solution. But, the impacts are substantial for a few of these in particular. And so, it's not that we don't want to recommend it, it makes sense, right? I mean, this is a need or a gap, right, that gets called out. I guess what I'm worried about is like what ends up, what are the implications perhaps of having too much in the plan, versus because I think that what all that matters in terms of what we can charge for SDCs is what goes in our
Constrained.
is it what goes into the financially constrained project list? Or is it the CIP?
No, people are nodding their heads yes in terms of the financially constrained list.
Financially constrained list, right? Okay, great. So we can have some pie in the sky projects on here, and they're not going to be in the financially constrained list, and so it's not really going to have an impact on anything. So okay, well that alleviates a little bit of my concern then.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll say, I see the confusion coming out. There's these call-out boxes have some implied solution to them, and I don't think that was the intent, is to pick out the solution. I think what we were trying to do is recognize that the energy that's going into this TSP from a grant funding perspective is mostly on the bike and ped perspective, but we also don't want to lose sight of the other important modes in the city. So as a way of kind of getting around that, we looked closely at your existing TSP, and I'd say 85 or 90% of the boxes on the screen or in the other screens that we're going to show here, those are existing TSP identified solutions or projects we're just bringing those forward, recognizing that, hey, someone's already identified these as gaps. Therefore, we're bringing the solution in your current TSP to the forefront so that you can see that it's mostly just a recognition that this is the gap. It's not really a recognition that we're here to implement the exact solution that's in your TSP. We'll rewash it through the evaluation process if it's deemed warranted, but these are not meant to be solutions. They're just meant to be a proxy for identified gaps.
Well, and maybe that's a thing for us just to keep in mind as we move forward of maybe reframing some of this, a little less solutions presentation and more study, evaluate.
Totally agree. It's a great point.
Sorts of language.
I think it's a really good point. Yeah, we can definitely.
Or as you just said it, previously identified gaps, something around there.
Yeah.
Did have a question though on the next slide of intersection control gaps and needs elsewhere in our suite of documents, which you all worked so hard to prepare. I think we maybe in our transit section, we might have identified potential bus rapid transit lines. And I was curious, and maybe it's just worth a flag of like, how does potential roundabouts at 42nd and Johnson Creek, as well as potential roundabout at 42nd and King Road, work with potential bus rapid transit? And maybe potential bus.
Actually move through it more efficiently.
Perfect.
So we just gotta make sure we just.
I was just thinking about like the FX bus, if we were to ever have like a Portland style FX, which maybe we wouldn't. But a bigger bus moving through a roundabout is like just the physically moving through the space.
I mean, I guess it would be worth talking to TriMet to say like what kind of bus were you envisioning that would go through here? And would there be any implications to that, how we would design the roundabout? But it sounds like Jen's been thinking about it.
Yeah, and that would be part of design, right? Like we would totally, that's a major transit line for us and we want to get that bus through efficiently. And so that's getting rid of the four-way stop and actually putting in the roundabout will be better.
Great.
And completely mountable, so for free too.
Sounds good. That was my question on that.
Okay, Ryan, you want to go next slide? So roadway transit, and again, don't want to go through every one of these projects, but these transit gaps and needs, these are projects that TriMet's currently studying and thinking about. As we get into maybe the functional classification maps here in a bit, we'll have more discussion because it came up in our advisory committee. But we have actually refined some of those functional classification maps based on those discussions. So maybe we can punt any questions on this one to that section of the presentation this evening. Okay, so this next one, it's a little hard to read for those in the room who don't have a paper copy, but this is what we're calling the multimodal connectivity gaps and needs. It's really kind of breaking this idea down a little bit further than what we originally intended, which was just to identify where there's potential street extensions or connections. Now, if you look at Milwaukie, it's not a community that's looking for major, greenfield redevelopments. Most of the city is built out, aside from a few lots here and there. So what we were trying to do is just recognize that, there is opportunities to make local street extensions or connections in a handful of locations that don't require purchasing someone's house, right? But there is maybe an undeveloped lot that if it were to develop, that connection could be realized. So that's the double-ended arrows in black. And then we kind of morphed it into, well, it's not just about local streets. Maybe maybe we can't get an actual local street, but we can certainly get some kind of a multi-use pathway, or we can make a connection from a multimodal perspective and not from a vehicular perspective. So those are the purplish colored lines there where there's just some obvious locations where that's feasible. So this is a map to kind of recognize that yes, there are some potentials, but there really are somewhat limited if you limit yourself to at least those parcels where there are realistic connections, right? That don't require purchasing property or making a connection across someone's front yard or through the house or the larger balance of the property. So,
We always love through the house.
Yeah.
Multi-use path connections. Those ones are everyone's favorite. Vice Chair Edge, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I sent a question to staff about this one as well. I was hoping that, you know, and I don't know, I didn't get a response back as to whether this data is actually available or not, but I was hoping we had GIS data available that could show the block perimeter lengths so that we could, you know, see where we have blocks that exceed that standard, that regulatory standard in our code. And that, you know, that's that's a policy level thing where, you know, we're trying to keep block perimeters small because it improves walkability, and that should be a goal citywide. It shouldn't just be a goal in the town center, or, you know, or close to bus lines or whatever. You know, we should be trying to make the whole city more walkable. And so I was really hoping that we could see something, you know, that would call out where block perimeter lengths are, you know, exceeding our standard and maybe even degrees of exceeding the standard, because I know that in some cases they're pretty wild block lengths in terms of, you know, block perimeter length, you know, on some of these super blocks. But you know, it's I'd like this to be informed by that and to see a little bit more aspirational, you know, proposed connections or areas where connections are needed, and we could be opportunistic about it rather than trying to be too specific. We could show a little blob instead of arrows with a line, which someone could relate to showing, you know, seeing as it going through their house. Instead, there could just be a blob that says, hey, connection somewhere in this area, that would tighten up, you know, the block perimeter lengths in this neighborhood and make it easier for pedestrians and cyclists to get around. So also I was hoping to see, and maybe that's not readily available, but it'd be nice to see this informed by, you know, that data in as we go through the process.
I could just respond quickly. So yes, sorry for not emailing you back, first of all. Secondly, yeah, no, that GIS data is not readily available. I absolutely see what you're trying to do. And I think this map reflects, you know, a pretty minor update to a map that existed in our current TSP. You know, we looked at the, and I would say, you know, was, you know, this map as it existed in our current TSP did not have this sort of like separated category for bike and ped connections. You know, that is sort of over time has evolved to be a way that staff have sort of been looking at this map, but that was not its original intent. I do think, you know, that, you know, the new transportation planning rule is sort of thinking similar thoughts to what you're thinking, Commissioner Edge. So I can see a future in which we are, you know, doing that type of analysis, especially in our town center. But yeah, we were not there yet. We basically looked at the, you know, existing proposed, in the current version of this map, tried to see if, you know, where those connections maybe have been made, where maybe development has occurred, where it was no longer feasible to make that connection, and then identify, you know, what we saw as just, you know, we've gotten questions from folks about, you know, thinking about developing large parcels, and sort of internal staff seeing an opportunity to maybe make a new connection, even if it is just a bike bed connection. But yeah, fully appreciate the limitations of that sort of approach to this analysis. And, you know, personally, as somebody who uses this map, will sort of continue to think about ways that, I know that there are different ways to do connectivity analysis, and we'll sort of think about ways that we can maybe be a little more sophisticated in our approach here.
Maybe just kind of following on that, I think this was a map that I kind of jotted some of my own notes down on, I was kind of curious on the eastern side of the map near Linwood, might it make sense to think about actually trying to put down whether it's a potential, bike ped connection or a potential street extension, that is essentially one giant super block north of King Road to Johnson Creek between Linwood and Stanley. Yeah, right? And it seems like if there was an opportunity for us along lot lines to map out a future connection, maybe at some point in the future when properties transact or are annexed in the city, something like that could happen. But we're also playing a 20-year game, so.
Brian, humor me for a second. Rifle to the very end of this presentation, if everyone can shield their eyes for the next.
Epilepsy warning.
Yeah, I think I may have made to the very end. Yeah, it's not. 58. Okay, all right. I goofed. I was preparing something to Commissioner Edge's comment. Okay. And it was really just an exercise. I'm now kicking myself for not remembering to include it. But I did take just a blank map and I tried just to identify all of the east, west, and north, south, and diagonal connections, right? And one of the things that pops out, and visualize it if you can, but if you look in the northeast quadrant of the city, yep, there's a lot of disconnected streets in that area. And there could be opportunities with major redevelopment of individual parcels or multiple parcels to establish those connections. But at the moment, there really isn't, parcels that don't have something on them,
yeah.
Right? It is really a built scenario. And in order to establish those connections, even at the aspirational level, you've got to look at purchasing homes or existing uses of parcels. And so I think to his point, yeah, aspirationally, we can map that. I'm not sure how well it goes over residing in a TSP when people see lines or blobs, even for that matter, that imply connections across built properties. So I'm not suggesting it's a bad idea. I'm just kind of thinking through my experiences with these maps. If there usually is a public upheaval, from the adoption of the TSP, it's maps like these, right? Where they see lines going through backyards or across properties, connections made where they're not accustomed to seeing connections made.
That's a good cautionary.
Usually is where it goes off the rails a little bit.
And maybe it's a very giant blob of saying like improve connectivity in this area. And the other place, because we've talked about it in previous planning commission meetings, but bike ped connectivity in an east-west fashion south of Lake Road is horrible. I mean, it's a labyrinth. The only way you move east or west is you have to go up to Lake Road and then you go east or west and then you go back down. And so, that I think is another place where it would be helpful to, maybe signal we want some sort of enhanced connectivity without putting maybe specific lines on the map. Maybe talking though about a few specific lines on the map, if I'm remembering correctly, and Vera's not here, she would maybe be the one who would know, bike ped connection between the Cheragino Farms development and North Clackamas Park. I believe that there might have been part of conditions of approval or other things like that. I've talked to people that live in that neighborhood and they said, hey, everyone says we're supposed to get a future connection down to the park at some point. And was just thinking it might be worth looking into that and thinking about mapping something there. I was really excited to see the bike ped connection by Llewellyn Elementary. Kind of right off of, what is that, Willow Street, kind of in the center top of the map. One thing I guess I wanted to just note and maybe think about extending the line further to the west, there's an alley that extends that people use that all the time as a bike and walking path. And it's gravel. It's not the greatest thing to ride your bikes on, but like maybe, maybe there's a multi-use path, a short multi-use path opportunity there, a little bit of asphalt, and it would probably be a really cool. And I think it would be really cool because if we go to the bike functional map later on, it actually would make some really interesting connections in that kind of part of the neighborhood. And then I'll get off my soapbox in a second, but the one last one is, and it's in the existing transportation system plan as a bike ped connection, is either at Olson or Kelvin, crossing over the railroad tracks to Mailwell. And maybe that's too hard to think about. It's in the TSP as like an overhead crossing.
It has to be.
Does it have to be? It can't be at grade?
Maybe.
I feel like, well, let me tell you, the reality is it is currently an at-grade crossing. People use it all the time. I've used it. And you actually, from that kind of portion of Ardenwald, you can get downtown so fast by hopping the tracks. And if it was just a little safer with an at-grade crossing,
With those railroad folks.
I know.
But I understand the point.
It
Yeah.
probably doesn't have a current rail order. So,
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not, look to the engineer on that, but it's in the existing TSP. I'd love to see it carry forward and talk to a friend of mine who's a railroad engineer, and his quick back of the napkin, he's like, you do that whole project for $500,000. At grade.
I agree.
I have one more in an area that people use all the time. If you go into 35th Avenue and then just before getting to the one that is at the park, that kind of seems like it ends nowhere, and the street on the left of 35th Avenue down south on the south side of Milwaukie Expressway, there's a lot of people that uses that street and get to the crossing to cross the highway right there at the very end of the kind of center. I don't know if you can see what I'm talking about. It's a pedestrian
Is that,
extension.
so maybe we can.
It's that if you go from Lake Road to 35th Avenue, go up, and then the first right street at your right from there.
So drop down to Lake and 35th, okay?
Yes, go up, and then you see the first street that turns into the right.
Oh,
No,
yeah,
the one
Yeah.
lower that doesn't have an end.
Yeah, that one.
That one actually connects, and then people use that all the time to take the bus and walk from there and then cross the street and take the bus stop that is. Or on the other side, on that side, uses that crossing, to get to the other side of the highway.
Is that ODOT right of way right there at like it's a weird little spot.
It has a kind of sidewalk in there. You have to jump in between blackberries and stuff, but people use that all the time just to get in there.
This is like,
Is that Worcester Street?
I don't know the name of that street.
I think it's Worcester Street.
I like this.
Okay.
This turned into like confessions of pedestrians in Milwaukee, telling you where
I
all the
think
secret
that one is
connections
important.
are. Yeah,
Because a lot of people uses that as a connection for the buses and get to the other side, especially if you live in that area where it's kind of isolated a little bit. And then the only connection to get to the other side of 224 is that tiny street, or you walk all the way to Oak, or then you disappear and you just have to drive all the way down. So there are just a couple of connections to cross 224 in that area. And that people uses that one there a lot.
Okay, that's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks for pointing those out. We'll take a look at them and see if we can add them to the map.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take all of that
Yeah,
information and give it some thought.
Thank
Figure
you
out what
for
to
your
do.
confessions.
it's always fun to jump the railroad tracks. You feel like a rebel.
I wonder if that's
Okay, so moving into the multimodal functional classification. So I know you all read the memo very closely, and so I could probably just open it up for questions, right? Is that where we're, no? Okay.
Can I
Yeah.
Can I ask one thing? Can we take a quick break?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure, that sounds great. Why don't we take a 5
Let's
good,
take a
or do we
good
want
moment.
10? 10? Let's take a quick 10-minute recess. It's 8:20. We'll come back at 8:30, which is 9 minutes from now.
Perfect.
We'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back to the February 25th edition of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. So we're picking up our transportation system plan work session, talking about multimodal functional classifications. Ryan?
Yeah, thanks. So this sort of proposal to expand our functional classification system to other modes in our TSP really started with internal conversations at the city about bicycle planning and sort of realizing that our greenway system had really taken the place of our bicycle sort of network plan and sort of seeing some of the limitations in that approach from a planning perspective. And so we were discussing this and talking with Matt and his team, and they had recommended that we consider, expanding the functional classification system for bicycles. And that kind of evolved to why don't we expand the functional classification system to all modes of transportation considered in the TSP. So, many of you might already know that, we have a functional classification system for vehicular traffic, for auto traffic. This would not take the place of that functional classification system. These would just accompany that existing functional classification. And, one of the limitations with, that map is that it is, in terms of sort of thinking through a network plan for these other modes, is that it is really auto-centric. It was developed to facilitate the movement of automobiles throughout the city of Milwaukie. And we realized that other modes have unique needs, from a networking planning perspective. And so we saw this as an opportunity to consider those needs and to take planning for each of those modes seriously. So we thought that this, solved certain sort of challenges that we were having, again, in thinking through our bicycle network plan, but it also made sense to extend to the other modes. And this is another reason is, it's consistent with what the new state planning rules are sort of pushing communities to consider. So it's not required, but it is sort of something that the rules suggest communities can adopt if they find it useful. And so how we sort of envision using this before we sort of get into the specific maps, and you all can kind of ask questions and discuss is, from a TSP, we would use this as we are now in this TSP update and also future TSP updates. And mostly in that regard, this is informing network analysis. It's guiding the development of policy recommendations related to facility design, traffic management strategies. And, it would also then, outside of the TSP, it would be used to implement the TSP. From a development review standpoint, sort of being able to identify for staff which facilities are most important for the pedestrian network or the city's freight network or bicycle network, as we are reviewing proposals, our ability to, ask for improvements to those facilities. And then, when we're doing sort of smaller planning projects, maybe corridor plans or area plans, that we would sort of have an idea going into that, what role each of these, specific streets play within the larger network. So I'll leave it at that for now. But, I guess one last thing I'll say is that, we have gotten a lot of really good feedback from the TC and, in talking with our regional partners like Metro and then also from the AC as well. So, I think what's in your packet has changed from what we're showing here tonight in the slides. So you might notice some of those differences. So I guess we'll just start by, unless there are any questions about that sort of like big picture thinking about this, we can start by looking at the pedestrian classification map.
Maybe a big picture question that I had, and I love the approach that you're taking and where you're going with this. I think one thing that maybe you could provide some clarity on kind of out of the gate is I kind of understand hierarchies within each classification, but what about hierarchies across the classifications? So where a higher class, major city walkway intersects with can't think of
A major city bikeway.
Major city bikeway.
Transit
or a
priority
local
street, yeah.
Or a local street, like what takes priority?
It's a great question.
And have you kind of thought about that? Because I think that within the hierarchies is great, but then the trade-off kind of considerations and the design approaches. So is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is probably not as many thoughts as would be ideal. But yes, we have started thinking about that. I mean, this was brought up actually initially when we were talking about this with our city manager, who was as you know, is a former PBOT employee. And it sounds like maybe that is how to think about prioritizing those different modes is something that, jurisdictions that have already gone down this road that's been a challenge that they've experienced. So we've started to think about it, and in putting together these maps, we have tried to be intentional about that. But we do still think that there are facilities that are going to be really important, both for bikes and peds, but absolutely in an environment where we have constrained right of way. There are going to be there's going to be a competition for which mode takes priority. So I think if there are specific issues that you see as we discuss these tonight, please bring them up.
Okay.
But yeah, it is something that's on our radar, I guess is what I would say.
Vice Chair Edge?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I really appreciate seeing the moves that have been made to this map in particular from what we have in our packet. One thing that sits really weird with my eyes is the major city walkway along the Milwaukie Expressway through the town center from south of Harrison. That sits funny with me, but I understand. I know what's going on there. But what that does is that helps provide connections, at 37th, I think, across the expressway, which is important. But the major city walkway, classification kind of dies right there. But that's right at the town center boundary. I think that's probably fine. And I'm seeing a connection across the expressway a little bit further to the southeast that I think should be designated as probably a city city walkway to make the connections between International Way and Lake Road. That can be an uncomfortable connection if we don't classify it as more than a local service street, I think. And it's pretty far out of the way to get across the expressway there, to get between Lake Road and International Way or whatever, on a more comfortable facility, when this is kind of built out to, what we'd expect our standards to be. So I think it's Freeman. I think that'd be a good candidate for just, a higher classification than local service walkway. To provide that higher quality connection. I mean, eventually, perhaps provide that higher quality connection across the expressway between those two major facilities. And then, what else was jumping out at me? I realized that the classifications here, you don't have to be like completely bridging, major city walkways with major city walkways everywhere. But, I'm just kind of looking at the connections between Harrison and to the south, and it's like, we're so close to another major city walkway, right there to provide perhaps a higher quality, facility to make that connection. And so you could stay on higher quality facilities, which I equate with the higher classifications. And that's why I'm bringing that up in that way. But anyway, I just want to say I really appreciate the moves that have been made here. And I might talk about this a little bit more when we do the bike classifications, but really, again, when you're thinking about, how you're designing, these networks, one thing to really, and I didn't see this in the packet, but one thing to think about is these barriers like the expressway and the railroad and I was going to say Kellogg Creek, but that's really the southern boundary of the city in a lot of places. But to think about these barriers that really create islands where there's very few access points to get across these barriers, and how far out of direction do we have to travel as a pedestrian or a cyclist before, or even a driver. But really it's, disproportionate impact on, people walking or biking to go longer distances out of direction to get across a barrier like a railroad or an expressway, to then have to double back and, go back to wherever it is they were trying to go in the first place. So just thinking in those terms is just really some of these geographic or built barriers create islands, and we should really be thinking about how we're providing connections between the islands and in an equitable way. So, really frequent connections as much as is reasonably possible. We're not going to have, connections across the railroad tracks every 400 feet. I get it. But, for pedestrians or cyclists, but to kind of, see where the opportunities are to provide higher quality connections across, in particular, across the barriers that create these islands. And so that's why I'm calling out Freeman. Any opportunity to get across the railroad tracks should be considered and as high quality as possible. So that kind of thing. And again, we might talk about that a little bit more specifically when we get to the bike map, but Freeman's the one that's really kind of missing here, I think, on this map. Kind of to the same point as what Jacob was saying earlier about trying to get across the tracks over at Malcolm or I'm sorry, Kelvin or Balfour, somewhere in that area. It's like, it really would provide a really disproportionate benefit to people walking and biking because of the reduction of distance that offers, in those cases. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. Also, just I think noting here that alleyway on Willow, Southeast Willow, that I was pointing out, I think is mapped here as a neighborhood walkway, kind of by Llewellyn. And so just wanted to flag that, but also wanted to flag that because I guess I'm wondering, kind of coming from the previous conversation about some of those missing gaps or missing links, if you will, might it make actual sense to map them here as part of a forward-looking thing, even if some of them are slightly dead-ended at this point, but to say, in a future-looking scenario, here's where we want some of these connections to be. And just one other slight thing, I think coming off of that Willow blue line, might be also worth staff thinking about how you get from there further to the west on the green line on 43rd. It seems like as a pedestrian, you're going to want to make that connection. So it might just be worth thinking about whatever that connection could look like.
Understood. Yeah. Thanks for the feedback on that. Unless just anything else on the pedestrian, moving on to the bicycle classification map.
I'll just piggyback on what Chair just said. One of the things that I see in county documents is that proposed walkways of different, they don't really have that different classifications, but proposed walkways go up as like dotted lines or dashed lines or whatever instead of solid lines, and that way they can kind of coexist on the map, and you can kind of see where something doesn't exist but it is proposed to exist. So to that end, Chair, the maps could reflect unbuilt or connections that don't quite exist yet, but still a classification for that facility when it is constructed.
Yeah. Point taken. That seems like a creative way to, show what is actually existing and where we might extend this classification in the future.
Small mapping thing that I was thinking about is when are we showing facilities outside of our jurisdiction and when are we not? And it does kind of vary here and there. And I'll just even on this map point out Linwood north of King Road mapped, sections of the Springwater corridor not mapped, so just a thing there's a consistency kind of question there. And I appreciate that Linwood's mapped. It makes sense for it to be mapped, but it also, in my mind, begs the question of why are other things not mapped?
Yeah, I think we had largely made the decision not to map things outside of our jurisdiction, but Linwood is clearly mapped here.
And I understand why you did, and it should be there, I think.
And maybe you should have another legend in there that says out of jurisdiction when you're using those lines there.
Yeah. Well,
it's so unclear why the south part of the Milwaukie Highway is a walkway, like along.
No, I think, Ernestine, are you talking about what Joseph brought up at the start?
Yes, very beginning. Yes, I saw it because I literally live
the major
across that.
city
So
walkway that would be along 224.
There are sidewalks there. I think it's in recognition, not maybe along that whole stretch, but there are stretches of sidewalk there. For us, it came down to, I think, two things. One, it's recognized in the regional transportation plan as a walkway. And then second, this is just such a crucial area to some of the, points that were brought up by, Commissioner Edge. Crossing in this area is a huge deal. There are a lot of key destinations, what we talked about earlier, for folks. And so just, I think and it's in our town center, which is really intended to be, a denser, walkable environment. And so in recognition of those, those things, we wanted to show it as a major city walkway, even, acknowledging that it's a really challenging area right now for pedestrians.
I don't believe there's any sidewalks on that.
I don't think there is any. There is sidewalk, and just not really. Yeah, not really.
South of Harrison on the, I guess on the east side.
I think we're mostly focusing in on between the segment.
Maybe the north side. Yeah, the north side of the. I'm looking.
And 37th.
Oh, between Oak and 37th.
There's
okay,
no
sorry.
sidewalk.
I was thinking of south of between Harrison and Oak.
No.
Okay.
So I think
that is
right. Why is
maybe the question is this the section between Oak and exact?
Why is this section?
No. Not that one.
Yeah.
Why is that map?
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
Which I understand. I think there is a plan or something that ODOT's doing to improve some intersection in there, and maybe in the future might be some kind of improvement into the area. Pietros is moving closer by. People will be going there more often. But I feel like there's some kind of future. Maybe, like I said, I think it might be something in your legend that you can add for that. It might make it less confusing.
Thanks, Ernestine. Commissioner Fuenmayor, I appreciate you bringing it up. Like if we're mapping it in order to help justify improvements at Southeast 37th, maybe we should just end it and I don't know. I don't know if would be concerns about showing a walkway on the shoulder of 224 that would be a major city walkway and would probably be a bridge to nowhere.
Yeah, that's kind of the question, because I remember when I just moved here, I looked at a map to figure out how to get from places because we had only one card, and I was like, with my kid and my husband was like, you guys can walk here, and he started walking. He's like, there is nowhere to walk. You can't get out of here. So it's like kind of hard when you are new to the area and you get a map and you look at this and you think that this is a walkable space, but it's rather not. and you find yourself walking your miles to get one area to another just because you really can't get there, or in a dangerous situation where you get your life at risk, especially there, but it's cars that are going so fast.
Well,
So-
and maybe to the earlier conversation about missing gaps and what Commissioner Fuenmayor said about that path that exists that wasn't shown, but if that segment we were just talking about were to go away, it still seems like it would make a lot of sense to connect from 37th over to, is that 35th? That's the other.
Yeah, 35th. Yeah.
So
And-
to figure out your maybe, or more Western, just how would you get from there over to that other major city walkway? Anyways,
I see.
maybe you could
Yeah.
spend a little
Yeah.
time thinking about some of the connectivity
Right.
there, if that,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, point taken.
yeah.
Yep.
Appreciate the questions there, Commissioner.
Ready for bicycles?
Round two.
Round two? Yeah, so I mean, we're proposing a similar hierarchy here. Any comments, questions, concerns? I know Commissioner Edge.
I probably don't have any. I think we can.
No?
move on.
No? It's amazing. Okay.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the only thing I'm seeing here, again, is I'd really like to see, us try to, bridge these barriers with, kind of formalize, these major geographic or built barriers, to connect these islands. So Freeman, a great example. Just kind of logically, it's I want to see another major city bikeway, north-south connection somewhere. And I don't know if I don't know what makes sense, but, to try to get from the middle of the city, the actual central, geographic center of the city to the south, to the southern neighborhoods, on Lake Road, and provide a connection across there. It's that's so challenging to do, but it seems like it would be really, a smart connection to be able to provide. But yeah, this feels so much better with 29th being a major city bikeway. Honestly, it's that feels like a gap filled, and it just feels like it's I know it's not symmetrical, but it just feels like a more logical layout, a hierarchical layout of these, where we're bookended by major city bikeways on Linwood and the Trolley Trail and 17th. We've got the Lake Road, along the south. We've got Monroe across the center of the city. And now we've got 29th, kind of in the center, going northward. It'd be great to have something in the center going southward, to kind of, continue that logical, connectivity, grid-like connectivity. But it's going to be a challenging connection to make. So maybe I don't know how we address that, but Freeman would be a logical one to classify, and then any other opportunities to get across these barriers, we should explore them. Everything else feels really good about this map right now, though.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I guess a question, somewhat related question is, and maybe it would be an island unto itself, but the beautiful work the engineering team did on 43rd north of King, we have that classified here as just a city bikeway, not just a city bikeway, but I guess if you think about that, yeah, exactly. If you think about that segment, I mean, that is, I guess in some ways, clearly BLTS 1 quality stuff, but maybe that starts to provide a northward connection on something. And you could actually, if you continued north, go back. If you continued north and hooked around, then there's that connection through Olson that could take you kind of all the way through. So that could be a thought. But I also agree with you on south of the railroad, is there another connection that could also be made somewhere? And maybe going back to the conversation on 37th, maybe it could be there, maybe it could be Freeman. I don't know. I know that I'm here in the room looking over at our city engineer. I know there's just so many constraints in with a highway and a railroad, but I do think thinking about some kind of increased connectivity could be helpful. As a comment, I guess I also wanted to ask a question. I feel like this this maybe helps us also resolve the central Milwaukie bikeway connection that, if I'm recalling, was never actually adopted by city council. So any thoughts on this?
It wasn't you're correct. It wasn't adopted by city council. There was a lot of differing opinions about that. The connection that we've included here is the preferred route that was
the planning
discussed.
commission's preferred route.
Preferred route, and it was the one that was recommended
alternative,
by
the
the consultant as well. So that's what we put in here. So
great. Hands up in the digital world, Commissioner Fuenmayor.
Yeah. So that connection that you guys are showing on 34th, it says 34th, right? That you're showing in there, the bike as a neighborhood bikeway, that one all the way up to connect to Washington. Actually, most people use the 35th and kind of goes around the park area, because that is a very dangerous intersection where you come out of 34th to Washington. There is a blind spot, and people get almost crash all the time. Crossing there is kind of dangerous there too. Most, I would say, I can see like hundreds of bikers going across every day, all the time here on 35th Avenue. And that's the way also the route they used to cross 34, like the 224. Sometimes going through that intersection there at the end on 37. So that's kind of one of the routes that people use to cross on the bike to that area too. Because that intersection on Oak, that is awful. That is very dangerous, being a bike in there. I rarely see people taking that one because of that. It's a difficult one. So anyway, I just want to say that what you're showing here is not really exactly what people do. It's kind of loop around that area there as bikers. They don't go all the way up in the mountain, but
I was going to say, just thanks for pointing that out. A lot of this is we use Strava data to kind of understand where people are going. And obviously Strava data is more, people that are more confident riders use Strava to track their route. So if there's something that is better route for ages and lower abilities, then we would rather have that be included.
Sure, traffic volumes are probably so much more or less on 35th than.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that for sure.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, it just turns out 35th is a BLTS 1, 34th is a BLTS 3, so.
Yes, I was going to say that's another thing there. Yeah.
Project complete, check mark. We could put some sharrows down still.
Oh, that's still on.
Okay, great. Joseph?
Thanks. So the other thing I was going to say on this is since you have, you're communicating with, county partners, as well. I know that there may be some hesitance about perhaps classifying, facilities outside of the jurisdiction, even with, perhaps like future classification, were the facility to be annexed into the city, you have that out of the way already on the plan. But regardless of that, regardless of, classifying it, thinking about where our network ties into the county's network that is under development, particularly in their current walk bike plan that's being updated, that I think would be just kind of a smart exercise to just make sure that I don't know if we need to highlight the connections necessarily. I'm looking at Kuhn Road basically, where the county has, the county has bikeways, but then they also have, they're trying to develop a kind of a neighborhood greenways network. And Kuhn Road, which is a county street at the southern part of the city, connecting Lake Road actually down to the south to Aldercrest Road. That's an important, and you see this a lot of Strava data on this route already, even though it's unimproved. It's like right in the middle of the map, the vertical, the north-south street that's in the county. There you go, right there. That's really hot with Strava data, relatively speaking. But the county is kind of flagging that street as possibly, a neighborhood greenway. And so just thinking about, obviously it's tying here into a major city bikeway, which is great. Hopefully we're going to have like a formal classification for Freeman, which kind of provides, like this logical connection, thinking more about how we're plugging into the surrounding network instead of just thinking about how we're working internally as a city. I think it was just more kind of the point of the comment. And so then, just thinking about where else there might be connections, and, making sure that we are logically aligned with those. Monroe's the obvious one, which we are aligned with it. That's eventually, the county is going to improve that, all the way out to the I-205 path. And it'll be a really nice low stress route all the way from the river to I-205, through the city. It would be great to make sure that where there are those other connections, and I know that there's some in the northeastern part, where we connect to Lake Overland Park or, some of those other neighborhoods in the county has some plans for, having some improved facilities there. And so we just should make sure that we're interfacing with them on those plans, making sure that we have, maybe logical routes that align with those connections.
Great. Thanks. I appreciate that. And, as you were kind of talking about Kuhn and the a north connection, I was also thinking if we were thinking about gaps and going back to the Cheragino Farm potential connection, North Clackamas Park, that could be another thing to think about. And then as I was listening to you talk, Joseph, I was looking at the map some more and thinking about your question about another north-south connection. And I was just reminded from some of the bike Milwaukie rides that I've gone on, Southeast 40th is kind of a backbone, and it's on this map right now, shown in both green and blue. It's fairly low stress. It's fairly wide. I imagine volumes are, depending on which exact block face you're on, are low. But this might be an interesting way of maybe not getting all the way north-south, but through kind of, the dead center of the map could be a place to kind of think about more.
Right, which they connect to 42nd, go all the way to Spring.
Yeah, it seems like it could kind of help you make some of those connections. And then the only other thing I was going to say about Southeast 40th is if you, even as it runs right now, is as a city bikeway, and it heads south and connects to Washington. And then, everything, it should probably continue south to Railroad. Because nobody's going to detour to the right to go a block when they could just go straight 2 blocks. So,
And it's a low volume.
And it's low volume.
It's a very,
Yeah.
probably already the crossings are, I think, the things that need the biggest improvements for that. So like Harrison and 40th is one of our.
Yeah. That is, and having ridden that on a bike Milwaukie ride with my kids, the only way we did that was getting a bunch of people out in the street to stop the cars. And I know there's traffic, automobile safety concerns there as well.
Yeah.
Can I ask maybe a provocative question? No, Ryan's shaking his head no. I know that, this proposed bike classifications map is reflective of our former bike map and various versions of our bike map, which, as I've talked to kind of longtime Milwaukeeans interested in cycling, also talk about how our original bike map was a little bit of a hasty exercise, that when we were, working on our TSP in the late aughts or so, or early 2010s, biking wasn't really even included, and people advocated really hard, and a map got thrown together really fast, and now that's what we're building a system off of. So are there things on this map that maybe shouldn't be on this map as we think about just the challenges of the street grid and how it's being used? And again, I know that's a provocative question, but felt like asking.
Did you have something in mind?
I mean, yeah, thanks. I mean, you can throw that back. I mean, I know that as I've heard people advocating for changes, I know Stanley, north of King, has been a topic that's kind of come up of like all the constraints. It's really challenging. And, I don't want to be the one to take something off a map, but at the same time, if it's not going to see a level of improvement and there's other potential connections nearby, I'm just really curious to kind of hear how you all are kind of thinking about some of these topics.
But it's gonna see improvement because I got a project with the county.
That's great.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you're gonna get a side path on one side, not two.
Okay,
One side that'll connect all the way from Johnson Creek to King Road.
fantastic.
So definitely thinking about that. So I would say, Stanley, this classification I think works because we're not calling it a major, but we're calling it, a city bikeway, which is what it's doing. It's part of the network, and it's giving one of those north-south connections that I still think is important. We still got to do a lot of work on the south side because there's nothing in the books right now planned. But that's a gap. That's a gap that's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, we did look at the maps quite a bit. And
Yeah. And we obviously missed some stuff, and appreciate sort of some of the, outside perspectives or where there might be connections with what Clackamas County is doing or, how people are actually using the system. And we did talk about Stanley in particular, just knowing that there were concerns about that. I think we maybe even had it initially, maybe as a major city bikeway, and ended up sort of downgrading it to reflect, it's still an important north-south connection that is, fairly continuous for Milwaukee. I think we just had that knowledge that Jen, had secured some money to make some improvements there.
Congratulations, that's exciting to hear.
Yeah.
Heard it here first, folks, at Planning Commission. All 45 of you viewing us later. Great, anything else kind of on this topic? Yeah, I want to say thanks to the whole team, kind of all the work you've done on this. This is an exciting map to look at.
cool, thank you. It was
Yeah.
like a big revelation when we finally figured out this is what we wanted to do. And I just want to give a lot of credit to Ryan, who did the deep dive and looking at a lot of different, like he looked at Portland and looking at a lot of different things, and he drafted this whole thing with us looking at the maps. But Ryan really did a heavy lift.
Oh, that's great. And I'm particularly excited, like the whole diagonal Brookside connection through Brookside Regents through there. I know that when I've like drawn my own maps, I'm like, why isn't this? So I didn't even have to ask that question. Yeah. Cool.
Got a couple of more classifications.
It's only
Moving
9:10, you know? Still got-
Hopefully those are the big ones. Transit classifications. I'll just point out something that came up with the AC that Joseph brought up, and had us sort of make a change to this map. Is you'll notice and maybe wonder about the railroad here being included as a regional transit way, and that was included really to reflect the Oregon's long-term plans for high-speed rail through this area. So we wanted to reflect that, and I guess that leads to another sort of the broader point, which you probably picked up on all of these maps, is they are a reflection of, and I know we haven't always been consistent about this, but a reflection of, existing conditions and really aspiration for what these facilities could become. One change from the advisory committee is just this: we've upgraded Linwood to Harmony to reflect a change that is proposed in the TriMet's Forward Together plan to include. If you look at the sort of and I encourage you to, if you're spending more time looking at these maps, to really look at the description language that's included in the memo for these different functional classifications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I was going to say maybe on that really fast, because what other ones? We have freight.
We have freight.
I guess just on the narrative description, I don't know if there's a point, and follow up via email with any suggestions on tweaks, but, thinking about the major city walkway and the improvements that are kind of talked about, or maybe even just some of the descriptions. But I was kind of thinking, is it worth including language about, two pedestrians being able to walk side by side? So you're thinking about space, bikes passing. The other thing I was kind of thinking about with major city walkways, especially probably more in the downtown core of street seats, cafes, street trees. I think there was some other kind of narrative there that I was kind of wondering about. And then the prioritization question that I had earlier of, what happens when you have a major city bikeway crossing with a local service street, but those were some of kind of my narrative comments, I guess, and I could probably send you some email on others.
That'd be great.
Please do. Yeah.
I have a question, comment. Again, I didn't say this in all the other maps, but these are great. Thank you. Again, I wanted to just comment here because it's a commonality on the maps when you saw Linwood, and then that is not into that we just talked before, that it was not into the area, but it's shown in the upper part of it that is not part of the boundary, the city above.
Oh, this section here?
No,
The Harmony
above.
section? Oh, above. Oh, right. This is another example of where we have included. Yes.
Yeah, and that's a sad that repeats in all the maps that you have shown, just to let you know.
At Linwood, we really like Linwood.
In the next 20 years, we're just going to take it.
Just to let you know, I know we want to take it in, but I don't know if it's there. But if not, like I said, just add in a map that is not, whatever it is. It is your preference, whatever you decide to.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your point.
There is one road, the one is 42nd, is it 42nd? I can try to see. It connects from kind of Johnson Creek area north, and it's a road that, yes, if I drive this all the time, and a lot of people take it all the time, and it's very, it's kind of one of the few north-south connections right there, constantly when you're driving. And it's not shown in here. And I was looking, it's like it might be a transit access street or whatever classification you want to put in there. But I feel like that connection in there is important to acknowledge. Yeah. Is that the one that passes through the water part tank?
You're saying you would like
if it goes south, then you turn into the water tank park, and then you go south. There is some area, it depends on what you take it, but you keep driving and it takes you that route when you're driving down from there. And I think that is it's a major connection when you're coming from there, if you want to go all the way over to, what's the other street? I can't see the numbers there. 32nd.
We're talking about bikes.
I think
This doesn't say bikes, this is say proposed transit classifications.
And this is mostly informed by TriMet
Yeah.
and what
they're
routes
planning.
they're kind of thinking about?
This is
Okay.
the-
Correct. This is
Okay,
primarily
thanks for that
reflective of,
context. That's helpful.
existing routes. Yeah, and I think, so major transit routes are, I should have said, are where we currently see frequent transit being provided, or where we would expect to see frequent transit provided.
Okay.
Based on TriMet's plans. I know that during the AC meeting, Joseph had also pointed out that the RTP includes a sort of policy map showing Lake Road and Oatfield and maybe International Way as well, as also potentially having future frequent transit on those facilities. Those, as we understand it, did not make it into their financially constrained list, and we were taking TriMet's lead at this point. So we've not just to follow up, Joseph, on that point, we haven't shown those as a major transit priority street, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then Commissioner Fionn-Mayor, so you're suggesting that you would like to see?
No, it's fine. I got confused with what we were seeing in the maps.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Maybe though, just thinking on back to the consistency topic, like this could also be one where honestly, it might make sense to extend your green line along Johnson Creek as it leaves our city and then reconnect it with 32nd, just thinking about a lay person who doesn't know where the line 75 actually goes to just, even though again, it's outside the jurisdiction. Yeah. So.
Yeah, we can, we'll think about that for sure.
Just tweaking, optimizing.
Just to improve the legend with a dotted line or something that it makes you understand that it's out of the boundary.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, we need to do a little bit of noodling on it and
Yeah.
get some consistency across all of them. Yeah. On to the freight map.
Yeah, I think the only comment that I have on this is really between, I think, what's in your packet and what's shown here is that 99E, south of the city here has been deprioritized by Metro and ODOT, it sounds like, as for freight. The idea being, I think that they would prefer to see freight on 224. So that's been downgraded from a regional truckway to a priority truckway in our plan.
And what's the implication of that? Like we're lane widths and turning radius kinds of improvements wouldn't necessarily be occurring on McLaughlin?
I think it's more risk, the type of truck cargo. So like Wes facility, the reason why that bridge, they paid into it is so they could make a left so they can get on the expressway to get down to Tri-Cities instead of going down 99E.
Yeah, I suspect that those would be the implications. I don't.
Okay. Well, I think just from experience working in other communities, when you get into what ODOT calls high, wide, and heavy, those oversized loads, they won't even direct them to 99E, right? Today, they don't do it today, and they won't be doing it in the future. They'll be putting them to facilities that they know can accommodate them, such as 224.
Yeah.
So
You also have the right up the heavy rail that shrinks up right there, just south of the treatment plant. That's a pinpoint. It doesn't have proper clearance.
I also think it provides probably more flexibility in what you're able to push ODOT to do if it's not labeled as a regional truckway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we want to have some agency over 99 in the future, and so not having that designation is helpful.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Support it. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments about the freight classifications? Great. Thank you all for comments on all the maps. That's really helpful. And I'm going to hand it back to Matt.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting kind of late into the evening here, so let's see if I can wrap this up really quickly. So I guess the question you might be asking yourself is, what does all this mean? How does it all fit together? So I think where we are in the project, obviously we've got some really great feedback here this evening. We're going to take a shot at doing some minor refinements to some or all of these maps. But we're quickly going to move into the stage of this project that is what we call project selection and evaluation. It's now we know where our gaps are. Now we know where our pedestrian level of traffic stress and bicycle level of traffic stress gaps are. Now we need to start identifying actual projects to fill these gaps. And more importantly, we need to find a way to evaluate them and prioritize them. So we could end up with 200 projects at the end of that selection process, but we need to find a way to boil those down into the highest priorities and the achievable projects. So one more slide, Ryan, and this is going to be actually one more after this, and then I'll have you go back to this. So this is our evaluation table. I think there was it in their packet?
Included, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's across it's kind of a useless slide, but really what we're going to do is that white strip across the image there's actually 3 pages, 11 by 17 front and back, right? That, if you go back one slide, Ryan, that is essentially a culmination of the 11 goals that we had identified way back in the original stages of kicking this project off. Each of these boxes here on the screen represent one of the selected goals that this committee and the citizens helped us refine throughout this project. And these are going to be the goals that we will use at the highest levels to evaluate these projects as we identify them. And so if you go back now, one more slide, right? What we have here is just a quick visual showing a sample project for how we're going to attempt to evaluate and prioritize these projects. So I won't go into the details here, but trust us if you haven't read it or go read it, and you'll see just at least an initial proxy project and how we would then assign a score based on those 11 goal statements and the evaluation criteria that goes with them. So that's just a really quick overview. I really don't want to get into the nuances of that tonight, other than just give you a little peek behind the curtain as to how we're going to proceed going forward. So between now and the next time you see us, we'll have a selection of projects. We'll have those projects evaluated and prioritized, and that should then kick off the next stage, which is the actual development of the draft TSP. So
Great. Any kind of questions, comments on the last piece? Maybe just a few. I really appreciated kind of including kind of a sample project. It was interesting to kind of think through it. And I know this was just kind of a thought exercise, so it won't spend a ton of time, but I was curious on like the healthy environment as well as climate mitigation and adaptation of just like how we might want to, and I guess I'm going to assume like as a project team, people might think about how they could change a project to make it score better. And I was kind of thinking one of my colleagues is working on a trees in the curb zone project where we're, literally going to be taking out parking spots to plant street trees. And so was just kind of thinking about that as in some of these scoring criteria about other things you could do, like, so this Roswell project didn't have anything like that and it scored 0, but I was like, oh yeah, you could plus it up. And if you wanted to really advocate for your project. So I don't know if that's the kind of thing staff will be thinking about as you're starting to think about projects. Maybe that's a very generic question. And then kind of slight comment on the economic vitality criteria, I think talks about facilitating economic activity through the efficient movement of people, goods, and services. And I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect between the goal statement and the evaluation comments, where it's like, this is not a freight project. And I think just wanting to, I guess, encourage people to think about how we tie the evaluation comments back to that goal, maybe a little bit more clearly. But again, I know this was a sample, but it was cool to see.
No, thank you for that. We spent a lot of time trying to come up with, you got 11 goals, and with each of those goals, there were up to 7 to a dozen policy statements that went with them, right? And so you kind of had to boil the policy statements down into measurable statements. And comment noted, we'll go back and see if there's a way to do that. I don't think we really, though, intend to sort of game the system a little bit here. I mean, yeah, certainly you can take every project and throw a landscaping strip on every one of them, and then that automatically bumps the, the environmental impact score higher. I think what we're trying to do is just identify generalized projects. I think in most cases we'll strive for street trees whenever possible, right? But it doesn't necessarily be a definition of every project to the point where it would score better as a result. So.
Oh, thanks. That's well noted. And again, I think this is also going to be super helpful for a fairly unbiased way of balancing a lot of different things in order to come up with a long list and help it get a little bit narrower. So great. Well, is there anything else on our work session?
No, I just wanted to thank staff and our consultant team for, all the effort that's been going into this, and, the taking the time, to spend 3 hours with us tonight so that we can hash over this has been, it's really valuable, and I really appreciate, having the opportunity to do this, nearly twice in, a week. It's, for me, I've had 2 opportunities, but, it's really awesome, the work you guys are doing, and, and really seeing you follow through and really try to get this right in terms of the new CFAC rules. I really appreciate it, and think this is going very well. So I'm really happy with the effort you guys have put in and what you've been producing so far.
Great. Thanks, Vice Chair. And I think I'll just echo that as well. I think we started at the top of the meeting saying, I was at a Transportation System Plan Technical Advisory Committee meeting earlier today in the city where I work, and people were talking about the great work that you all are doing because you're trailblazers here. So want to just kind of reaffirm that. So if there's nothing else on Transportation System Plan at this point of the agenda, I'll move us forward. Does that sound good? Sounds great. So at this point of the agenda, we'll convene as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. Staff have any updates to provide, or do CIAC members have anything to report on?
I don't have anything to report, but I just do want to iterate that since there's some new folks in the room and that the CIAC, we're going to talk a little bit about what the CIAC means and what it is when we do our training and discussion on April 9th, I think it is, okay. April 8th.
And great. And do we have anything from Planning Commission on CIAC? Nope. And do we have anyone in the audience wishing to speak with us in our official capacity as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee? Hearing none. Planning Department, do we have any other items for discussion, commission updates, business updates? Aside from the fact that we're going to be adding some new planning commissioners in a few weeks. Anything else, Laura?
No, it's more, I guess I can talk about as part of the forecaster.
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about forecaster.
Okay, forecaster. So March 11th, we do have one item on the agenda for a public hearing. And so it's pretty straightforward and it's not controversial. It should, as far as I know, it's not controversial. It should be, I should make that caveat always. And so we will have our new planning commissioners hopefully at that meeting, and we'll just have the one item, and it should be pretty straightforward. Then we are not going to be meeting on March 25th because it's spring break and folks will be out of town. And so then we come back on April 8th, like I mentioned before. That's when we will be having we've talked about having this for a long time and have been waiting till we had a full commission. And so we will be having the joint meeting with the NDAs as well as a land use training. So it'll be a training that's land use 101 for the commissioners, new commissioners, and existing commissioners that haven't done a deep dive into land use and with the NDAs. And so that will be the bulk of our meeting on April 8th. And that's it.
Great. And then in terms of kind of other planning commission business, we've also kind of postponed our annual officer elections a little bit. Normally that's business we accomplish in January, and with onboarding new planning commissioners, we wanted to hold off on that. We were actually hoping to do that tonight, but Commissioner Graytrick and Commissioner Pinnock were unable to make it. So we're going to actually take that to our next meeting, March 11th, I believe. We've got some baton passing or gavel passing to do, and looking forward to that. So the only other thing I think I'd just flag, and I think the Deputy City Recorder shared it out, but also on March 11th, if you really want to spend your day in public service, aside from our Planning Commission meeting that evening, there's also an Oregon Government Ethics Commission public meeting, law training that day here at City Hall. So other boards and commissioners like ourselves are invited to attend, but not required. I think with that, we've got nothing else. Take a motion to adjourn.
I first want to say before you end it, thank you for all the reports. Thank you for all the support. And I never got that training, and I'm envy that everybody's getting that training now.
Sorry about that. We kept waiting for the right moment and it never happened.
I know, for a year and it never happens. Anyways, but I'm happy that at least the new people are gonna get the training, and everybody's gonna have a wonderful time. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Ernestina.
I can motion to adjourn.
All right, Commissioner Foynmayor, it's been motioned. Any seconds?
I'll second that.
Second, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Right.
All right, we'll see you next time.
night.
Thanks again for your service, Ernestina.
Thank
See you
you.
around.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Yep.
you.
All right.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.